Derek got a letter out of nowhere, addressed to him by name, and inside it hit harder than a punch. It had been 10 whole years since they'd last seen each other, and Militaire was demanding he come straight to the capital. He crumpled the letter shut, glanced aside, and smiling, felt that rush of nostalgia hit him like a wave. A few days before all this went down, the chaos erupted in the city of Reden, inside the Blacksmith's Guild. And then the voice demanded, "So what did you tell me?" The main character blurted, "Wait, am I really fired?" And you could practically feel the anger radiating off him. Right across from him stood a man with a girl on his arm. The man started screaming that there was 0 point in him working for his guild, and Derek didn't even try to defend himself. He just froze, stunned by his own words. The protagonist shot him an apology and demanded he spell it out better, but the guild leader cut him down fast, saying the price-to-value ratio was just painfully bad. Turns out it was Guildmaster Sinon. He laid it out and said, "That's why you're getting fired." Then he waved him off because he had other fires to put out and needed Dyert gone fast. Dyert didn't fight back at all. He just walked out. Sinon let out a huge breath of relief when everything finally went smoothly, stuck out her tongue and grinned like, "Good riddance." The hero set his sights on the capital, jumped into the carriage, and they tore off. Then the coachman announced they'd arrived, and right then, Durrett leaned in and told the boy he'd finally fixed his thing. He clutched the toy in his hands and beamed so hard it lit up his face. Then he started chatting about the horse that moved, and the woman beside him smiled right back at him. The moment the protagonist stepped away from the cart, the boy blurted out thanks and even called him Grandpa. And Dyert couldn't help thinking about just how much of his life he'd poured into blacksmithing. For 30 years he'd done this. Now he was an old man, and with a steady breath, he shot his hand up toward the sky and stared at it like it held answers. Dyert ended up in the kingdom of Gloss, and right in its capital to boot. The place wasn't huge, boxed in by towering mountains and thick, stalking forest. The protagonist strode through the city streets, scanning everything like he was hunting answers, and realized, yeah, way more people were here than the last time he'd visited. Now that I think about it, he never really left Riten, he just used the escape as cover. Honestly, it even made him feel better, and he started humming a tune. Right then, one of the stalls yanked his attention. He strode over, looked the saleswoman in the eye, and asked what she'd recommend, and she swore by the wild boar shashlik. So he grabbed one. Once he paid, he grabbed the skewer of meat and dove in, and you could practically feel the heat blasting off it. Durrett was clearly loving every bite, grinning as he declared it delicious. She stared at him like he was a ghost, said she'd never seen him before, and then demanded where he came from. So he blurted that he came from Reten. The man even admitted he once worked for the Blacksmith's Guild, then got booted out, and right then the crowd exploded in shouts, demanding to know if the other guy even understood how priceless that falchion was. Rage boiled in the girl's chest as she gripped the sword's broken remains, and snapped that it couldn't even slice through the ant's branch. The young guy snapped back in anger, saying she just didn't know how to use it, and you could tell this whole mess was grinding his nerves. The moment the protagonist saw it, he demanded answers, like, what the heck was going on? Was this really an argument? The woman leaned in and told him it was coming from the gun shop. The saleswoman warned that their weapons had a terrible reputation, and the main character just let out a quiet chuckle, thinking, yeah, bad people like that are everywhere. After that, Dyert said he'd go take a quick look. Then he came back and thanked her for the delicious food, only for the woman to warn him to be careful. She kept shrieking at him that the guy promised her the sword was steel and told her to face the plant monster with it. Then he blurted out, "So tell me, did you really sell me a fake?" The arms dealer snapped back that she had 0 proof, while an evil grin stretched across his face, and a hint of anger burned in his eyes. Rage burned in her chest because he was right, and it felt so unfair. Then the kid suddenly turned to her, called her mom, and pleaded, "Stop this fighting, let's get out of here." Right now, the main character had already closed the distance to the chaos, staring at the sword's stump and thinking, Is this guy really claiming he's made of steel? Darrett snapped his head toward the arms dealer and shouted that lying was wrong, instantly pulling the focus of both fighters and the whole crowd. He leaned in and told him straight. He was a blacksmith too, and that sword was a fake. It wasn't steel at all, it was just tin. The arms dealer snapped his finger at him on the spot and barked that it could never happen, that it was pure slander. Then the main character stepped up to the woman, asked for the object for just a second, and she said yes. So he handed it over like it was the moment they'd been waiting for and declared it as the proof. Darrett said, "You can see everything right on the blade. The ripples are crystal clear. If there was steel buried in there, the trace would have been perfectly straight." In the crowd, word spread fast. People were already whispering that a blacksmith they knew had warned them about the same thing, so the main character's honesty couldn't be doubted. And then, right on cue, someone shouted to fetch the guard. The arms dealer's rage finally hit a breaking point. He dropped and passed out, and as soon as he did, Darrett snapped that this man was scamming people and cashing in on everyone else's ignorance. The main character's fury roared as he snapped toward the guy, telling him to quit hiding and take responsibility, like a blacksmith who actually stands by his craft. The arms dealer was trembling with pure rage. He snapped at the man to shut up, screamed that it was all his fault, then seized one of the swords and warned him not to dare move. The guy sprinted straight at the main character and barked for him to stop preaching. Then the main character told everyone around him to clear out as a bitter curse sat locked behind his teeth. Right as the arms dealer closed in on Garrett, a girl stepped up in front of him and ordered him to stop cold. Then the stranger yanked the sword straight out of his hands, and the main character and those furious customers went dead silent, stunned at what she just did. The arms dealer crumpled on the ground, unconscious, and when the girl spun to the guards, she demanded they haul him away. So they nodded and obeyed. Right then, the whole crowd erupted in pure joy. Smiles burst across every face, and someone shot their hands up like they were cheering in the moment. People instantly recognized her as the commander of the soldiers, and they erupted into loud cheers, while the main character stood there, stunned by how fast everything was unfolding. He stared at her, thanked her with a voice full of relief, and said she saved him, only for the girl to shrug it off and say, "It's my job." Then her eyes snapped to something in an instant. She stared at him like he was the answer to a mystery, and the more she held his gaze, the more her nerves started to shake, her words tripping over themselves as she tried to finally ask him something. And even Darrett, yeah, even him, felt that pressure creep in from her attention. He couldn't tell if his face screamed unemployed, or if he was seconds away from getting hauled in as a suspicious old man. Then he finally heard the question about whether he was a teacher cut off right there. A bright grin burst across her face, and a hot blush spread over her cheeks as she said, "I'm Militer," then leaned in like, "Tell me, do you remember me?" 10 years ago, the commander said, she'd made the girl a toy sword. And the moment he mentioned it, the main character's mind snapped straight to that little ponytailed kid from before. After that, Darrett really locked eyes with her, grinned, and said, "Wow, you've grown so much. I never thought we'd run into each other here." She lit up and answered, "It's really you." The girl snapped, asking if he'd ever gotten her letter. And right then, her subordinates started blurting out who he even was. Militaire shot back that the protagonist had been there for her since she was tiny. She'd sit down and just chat with him for a while. Then the girl snapped to her subordinates, "Go on ahead, return first." They nodded and obeyed. Right then, Darrett blurted in shock, "Wait, you're really a commander now." And she shot back, "Yeah, it's all because of you." The protagonist started praising the feat, but the girl cut him off. She insisted it wasn't his victory at all. It was her sword doing all the heavy lifting. Darrett demanded an explanation, but Militaire snapped, "Look at me," and then slowly clicked the meaning into place, while his face tightened with raw, trembling tension. He snatched the sword and stared at the pure pitch-black blade, until he realized it was the divine magic sword Shinma, rank S, forged with holy power, and his jaw dropped. "This is the country's treasure," Militari smirked and told him. "No, I made it." Darrett couldn't believe he'd forgotten that sword. then blamed it on age and dementia, until the girl snapped back and told him she wanted to say it a different way. Militaire's face turned dead serious as he said the toy sword he'd made for her had finally evolved. Shocked, the main character blurted the question again, and when he admitted he'd never heard of anything like it, the girl shot back that she'd never seen it before either. Nilitari told her that as she grew, it reshaped itself too, starting out like a tiny dagger when she was a kid, then transforming as she got older until it finally looked exactly like this. Then the girl leaned in and told the main character that his weapon could probably evolve, and he stared at that sword in pure shock. Dyaert stared at it hard, wondering if this sword was truly just a toy from back then, or if something else was going on, and he started matching his memories to what he was seeing. After that, the main character fired off another question. Was it really true it used to be a toy? And he practically couldn't believe his own ears. Militari called it the maturation of feelings, and Durit just stared at her, confused, so she laid out her theory like a challenge. The girl stared at him and asked whether anyone had noticed anything like that when he created those tools in Webtoon. The protagonist shot back a hard no, saying there weren't any adventurers left there, because in written stories people tweak things, and he figured a blacksmith like him couldn't just break into that world. He blurted out that everything he made got tossed before it even had time to open, and the girl cut him off to confirm it. Then she called him out for a specific purpose. Militari stared him down with grit in her eyes, cheeks blazing, and then, right on the spot, she told him she needed to ask him for a favor. She blurted that it was all in a letter, then the guy snapped, "So what do you need?" And the girl seized his hand and declared, "It's all simple." She leaned in and begged him. Could he forge blades for their valiant army as their personal blacksmith? She bolted away the second he tried to make his move, snapped back no, and said it was too much for him. Then the girl bowed, insisting she wasn't just asking, she was begging him. The military came marching back toward him, and she snapped that they had no one else to ask. Durit froze in shock, stammering, "Why me?" The girl shot back that there were reasons for it, and he snapped, "What reasons?" Right as the woman he'd helped earlier jumped into the conversation. She flashed him a warm smile, thanked him for everything, and admitted she didn't even know how to repay him, while the girl beside her snapped to attention, saluted, and called her commander. And that last part clearly didn't sit well with her. The girl stepped up to her and said she'd spotted her at the entrance ceremony, and she couldn't hide her relief that nobody got hurt. Militari then snatched the protagonist's hand and barked that they had to move, like, right now, and the shock hit him hard. First he went completely mute, then he blurted out, "Where are we going?" The woman and the girl kept yelling their gratitude, and they urged him to check out a hotel in the Eastern District. He was convinced he'd finally made useful connections, so he flashed a grin, waved, and promised he'd drop by. Right then Melida cut him off, snarling that he hadn't said a thing, or else she'd make him bite his own tongue. In Webtoon, at the Blacksmith Guild, Sinon fussed with his hair and then stared hard at his reflection, making sure he looked perfect. He shut his eyes, struck a dramatic pose, and totally convinced himself he looked dazzling. Then he grinned and winked with one eye. Then he strode up to the workers, greeted them with a sharp smile, and asked if they were ready to earn some money. His subordinates snapped back their greetings right away. The man grinned and announced it was time for the morning meeting, starting right away with the guild's philosophy. Right then, the unknown cut him off and begged for forgiveness, so Sinon spun around and demanded their names. Standing there was a dark-haired guy, backed by a whole line of guards. The guy strode up to the guild master and demanded, in a dead serious voice, whether the main character was in here. Nobody answered him, so he fired the same question again. "Is Dyaert here?" Then he leaned in and announced he was a messenger from the royal palace. "I'm Senji." The latter started to claim he was searching for the legendary blacksmith Dyaert, and said he had a job for him. Right as Sinon exploded with rage, demanding whether he was really daring to bring a request to that man. The man claimed he was the guildmaster and demanded to know what he wanted. Did Mr. Sinon have any requests? Senji shot back no, and that answer instantly set his anger boiling higher. And then Sinan snapped that the main character was gone, so he fired that useless fool on the spot. Senji froze in shock, then blurted out again, "Wait, you really fired him?" The man snapped that Darrett was just siphoning the guild dry, and then he added, without a shred of respect, that he didn't think the guy was worth anything. Sinan smirked and bragged that he got exactly what was coming, and Senji's confidence started to crumble as he slid back. Then he demanded to know if Mr. Durrett was really gone for good. Worsening by the minute, he fumed as he kept ranting that the blacksmith the queen herself swore by had been fired. Senji snapped that everything had gone horribly wrong, and the soldiers demanded what they were supposed to do with it. Seinen told them to hand it over to him, but the soldier shot back that they'd been ordered to deliver it straight to the main character. Rage boiled in his veins as he stormed up to the soldier, snatched the box, and demanded what was inside, only for the soldier to shoot back, "What are you doing?" And Simon snapped that he was the guild master here. The latter snapped with fury that he had way more experience than the main character. Then he yanked open the box and froze in shock. There it rested, Amatsurugi, the angel's sword, stamped as an S-rank blade with the saint's element. And yeah, it practically glows right in front of you. Sinan started shaking right away. She blurted out that it was unbelievably beautiful, like it was truly the blade an angel would wield. Senji insisted they had to hand it to Mr. Darrett for repairs, and the guy immediately shot back, asking why he should be the one carrying that treasure. He let out a heavy sigh and admitted it was his doing, then snapped back like it mattered most. This sword was forged by Mr. Durrett himself. Sinan stared at the sword again, replaying the idea that the protagonist forged it, and in that instant her face twisted with fury and shock at once. Then he snatched Senji by the collar and screamed that this wasn't a joke at all. It was out of line. Sinan snapped that there was no way a man could have made it, right as the guard blurted that Mr. Senji should be freed, and Senji himself insisted the sword just wasn't in that shape. Senji declared the Amatsurugi was a blade that had truly evolved, and the room froze in absolute, breathless silence. Sinan froze in shock and blurted, "Did the sword really evolve?" Then immediately snapped, "And you really thought I was that stupid?" Senji stared him down and said it was the truth. So the queen snapped into action at once and ordered everyone to find him. No delays, no jokes, dead serious. The sign blared again that he couldn't take it anymore. Then he stormed up to the sword and promised, "I'll fix this right now." Senji snapped his hand up in front of the guy and demanded he stop, because he wasn't Darrett. The man smirked and shot back, "I'm the guild master, so I'm the best blacksmith here." Then he shot a grin at the others and declared, smug as could be, that he ran the place, before ordering them to wait right here, and Senji thought, yeah, that makes sense. The man shoved everyone out of the room, went right back to the sword, stared hard at the blade like something was wrong, and then shrugged. Maybe he could just sharpen it on a whetstone. He's never sharpened a sword himself, but he's watched his workers do it, so he can finally handle the blade, and his sharp eye and quick learning let him master everything like a pro. And then he moved fast, but something clearly went wrong. When a savage scream tore out of the house, even the birds flying overhead scattered in panic. Senji blurted out his name at once, asking what that loud boom was and if he was all right. Seinen snapped back that he was still working, so they needed to shut up and stay silent. Right when he finally made his move, everything went sideways, and the sword shattered clean in two. Sinan realized he just shattered the country's priceless treasure. One crime so brutal it meant his life was basically over. Executed, hanged, drowned, or beheaded. Panic slammed into him and he crumpled to the floor, smashing his head. The man sat there, mind racing like a trapped animal, but every second only tightened the knot in his chest. And not a single solution even showed up. Right after that, he forced himself to slow down, cleared his mind, and hunted for an answer. Then he snapped into the breathing technique he'd built, and just like that, the solution slammed into his head. Sinan figured, if it's broken, I'll snap it back together. And right after that, he started rummaging through the boxes like he was hunting for the missing piece. In one of the boxes packed to the brim, he finally spotted the exact thing he'd been hunting, only for it to be temporary glue. Right after that, Sinon finally stepped out and thanked them for the wait, and Senju casually brushed it off like it was nothing. Yet it was crystal clear to everyone. He was the guild master. Then the boy shot his hand forward and demanded permission to test the blade. But the man cut him off cold, snapping that he wouldn't touch the sword and calling him an amateur, saying it wouldn't respond to anyone for a while. Senji tried to push back, but Sinon snapped, asking if he really meant to say he didn't trust him. The guy scrambled to explain that wasn't what he meant, only for Sinon to cut him off again. Senji stared at the sword from afar and said he could still spot rough spots on the blade. Then Sinon snapped that it was all a lie, that Senji had no proof, and that he only needed to fold it back. Then the man swaggered to the box, smugly thinking he'd drop it there and blame them later. Until the second he slid the sword in, he clipped it hard on the side of the box. With a brutal jolt from the blade, the busted piece ripped clean off and clattered to the floor, and Sinon's face went white, while Senji and the guards stared in pure, stunned disbelief. The man knew trouble was coming fast. The guards seethed, Sinon's men shook with terror, and Senji stood there totally clueless, like he missed the whole moment that just snapped everything. The guy started shaking like crazy, whipped his head toward the guildmaster, blurted his name, and demanded to know why he was supposed to fix it. Then the man just mumbled nonsense under his breath. Terror clawed at him as he shot a look over his shoulder at his subordinates, because they were far from happy with what their boss had just done. Then he scratched his chin, squinted up at the ceiling like it betrayed him, and muttered that it was way too strange. He was certain he'd fixed it, so maybe, just maybe, he'd mixed it up with another one. Right then Senji shot up to him, yanked his collar, and demanded to know what he'd done, calling him a stupid idiot, while pure fury burned in his eyes. He crouched down and snapped that the man had shattered him, so he couldn't trust him again. Then Sinon immediately erupted, yelling that it was rude. Turns out Senji even choked up with a tear, but the guildmaster's final words hit like a strike. Senji snapped, pointed at him, and declared, "You're under arrest." Right then, the main character sat there sipping tea with Militaire, then dropped the bombshell. He'd been fired from the guild. Militaire snapped wide-eyed, absolutely stunned, because how could they ditch someone with his reputation as a blacksmith? And honestly, his boss was so clueless he might as well be made of cork. Militaire's fury was blazing. She grabbed a fork with both hands and drove it into the cake like she meant it, then snapped that this was the absolute peak of incompetence. At that very moment, Sinon sat in the carriage, boxed in between two guards, her hands chained in cuffs as her thoughts spiraled, replaying how everything had crashed into this exact nightmare. In his own head, he figured it out. This whole mess was the main character's fault, and rage burned so hard that he swore he'd get revenge on him for it. Right then, at the brutal army base, a soldier marched up to Darrett and shouted that she wanted forgiveness, and that she was begging him to become their personal blacksmith. The main character shot back that nothing was wrong. He just needed to know what to do next, so the girl smiled and said, "Everything's fine," then pointed straight ahead like the answer was right there in front of her. Militaire jabbed at the building and declared it was their forge. Then Darrett shot back, "Come on, it's painfully obvious it's military, it's absolutely gigantic." After that, they walked in together, and the girl spun around to everyone and begged for forgiveness. Everyone's eyes snapped to her. Then they spotted them and stepped up to greet their commander. The boys shot to their feet, snapped into attention, saluted with their palms on their foreheads, and announced they were paying their respects to her. Militaire told them to chill, and they listened. Right after that, they turned to her and fired off a question. Who were the men standing right beside her? That sweet smile, that blush on her cheeks, she pointed and said, "This is the one who forged my sword." Then she dropped the name like a bomb, Mr. Durrett. Every boy stared at them, stunned out of their minds, because deep down, they couldn't buy her words, and the sword performer looked totally different to them now. He scratched the back of his head, then fumbled out a stutter. "I'm really glad to meet you," and finally said, "I'm Darrett." The boys started swapping stories about a legendary blacksmith they just met, but they dismissed him as an old man who didn't look like the guy behind the legendary sword, and straight up figured the commander was lying to everyone. The protagonist listened hard, still not fully buying that he really forged a sword like that, and once again, he bristled when they kept calling him an old man. At that moment, Militari snapped, asking where Nana Hikari was right now, only for the boys to hesitate, then admit he'd finished some work and slipped out. The girl let out a shaky breath and snapped, "So you really did it again?" And the guys just stared back, saying they warned him, but he never even bothered to listen. The protagonist whipped his head toward the commander and asked if she meant the local blacksmith. Then she cut him off and snapped back. Yes, she said their current blacksmith is Nana Hikari, because his family has been pouring out massive donations, and he's Duke Felgren's one and only son. With that nasty attitude of his, no blacksmith in their right mind would have him. So for now, they just shoved his non-stop grumbling down and pretended it didn't bother them, even though it was painfully obvious that neither she nor her people wanted him to be stuck there. He thought, so people like this are everywhere, and let out a breath, because just then the girl started trying to tell him he was on a whole different level, and the door to the room swung open. It was Nana Hikari, sparkling like he had starlight trapped in his aura, and with a grin plastered on his face, he leaned in and told everyone, "It's still dirty around here, just like always." Militara snapped his name out loud, and the protagonist spun toward him, stared, and instantly thought, "Man, he looks just like his old boss." The girl grilled the blacksmith about where he'd been, and he just smirked, saying he'd gone on a date. So the brunette pressed him for the longsword, and Nana Hikari grabbed the weapon and fired back. "You mean this one?" Then the guy shoved the sword straight into the brunette's hands and barked at him to hold it. And the poor guy flinched hard at every word. He missed it clean. He and Derek shot off in opposite directions, and the whole time Derek kept thinking, was that guy really for real? Because this big shot wasn't hiding anything bad at all. Nana Hikari beamed and asked them what they thought of his sword. Did he nail every single detail perfectly? The brunette fumbled through a stuttered thanks, and then Nana Hikari let out a huge, heavy sigh. The protagonist stared at the sword like it was cursed and untouched, then turned to Militaru, thinking he should ask her about it too, right as that guy spotted him and scrambled to his feet. Nana Hikari swore he'd fixed it, then sprinted up to the brunette, snatched him by the collar, and demanded to know what, exactly, he had a problem with. Right then, the main character burst in and slammed into the moment, stopping the guy's fist right before it could smack the brunette, and leaving the blacksmith completely stunned. Derek stared down Nana Hikari with sheer authority, snapped that if he was a blacksmith he should fix his work, and Nana Hikari shot back. "What do you need, old man?" Soldiers surged in on them, barking at the guy to shut it down, while she jumped in, explaining that the man in front of them was the blacksmith from Raiden who forged her legendary sword. Nana Hikari snapped his eyes to the protagonist. Pure shock hit him hard, and then he pressed her again, demanding to know if it was really true. The girl burst into telling the guy, "You're already a first-class blacksmith, and now we'll have a second master." But right as she lit the spark, she was cut off before she could finish. Nana Hikari yanked his hand from Derek's grip and told him, dead serious, "Show me what you can do." Derek shot back, "You're really talking about me." The boy planted his feet wide and crossed his arms across his chest, smiling like trouble, and then he challenged them to a duel between blacksmiths. Nana Hikari promised they'd duel with swords they forged themselves. Break your blade and you're done. Then the main character nodded like, "Got it." At the same time, the guy grinned and said there were two conditions. Then he lifted his hand like a marker to show exactly what they were. Nana Hikari jabbed at the materials and declared their first rule. They'd only be allowed to turn those into weapons. Next, one of the forge's employees will take up his sword. Then he jabs a finger at the crowd like he's calling them out. Then he jabbed his finger at the newcomer, Confi, and the girl went rigid, stunned, mouth gaping in pure disbelief. He stared in pure shock, asking again if he really should be there, then firing off how long she'd been standing there. because she was so tiny he hadn't even noticed her at all. Dorette froze at the chaos, then forced himself to snap back and swear, "Everything's fine," and Militaire stared, too stunned to hold back, so she called out to him right away. But nobody listened to her at all. Nana Hikari grinned and said it was all decided, while the main character didn't even blink, staring straight at his rival as the girl seethed with anger. The guy set the duel for 5 days, swore that if the man lost he'd march back to his village, and the main character shot back that if he won, he'd finally take his work seriously. Nana Hikari let out a sharp breath, then straight up asked what Nana Hikari thought of himself, because that answer would forge his future. And with that, he stormed out and slammed the door so hard it rattled the whole room. Militaire shot forward, bowed to Darrett and begged for forgiveness, admitting she'd only made everything worse. Then Darrett snapped back that none of it was her fault. Just as they were still talking, Confi came sprinting in. Tears spilled down her face as she demanded, shaking, what she was supposed to do, because all she could do was look after the sword. With a grin, the main character told her everything was fine, and promised he'd forge her a blade so she'd never lose. Militaire's jaw dropped at his words. He even said they'd forge top-notch weapons from whatever they had on hand, because not every blacksmith could pull that off, and he leaned in, told them to trust him, then shot a wink. After a while, the protagonist started forging weapons. He cranked up the furnace, scanned the room, and realized all he had to work with were D-rank materials. He yanked on his gloves and announced it was time to start. Then, right then and there, the military barged into the room and called his name. She told him she hadn't seen him work in ages, then brightened up and asked if she could watch, only to hear him say she could only do it from a distance. And the girl immediately beamed and agreed. Militaire slid into a chair by the table, settling so quietly the room barely noticed, while at that exact moment, the protagonist was melting metal in the furnace. He swore he'd already got the whole plan locked inside his head. First, he pounded the hot material into shape. Then he shut his eyes and pictured the finished picture in his mind. Then he snapped his eyes wide open, and the stuff in his tools erupted into blinding light, flooding the whole room. Militaire heard it and instantly decided it was the perfect sound. The man even insisted it had only been a few weeks since he last gripped a hammer in his own hands, but still, to him, that felt like an eternity. Rage sparks in the blacksmith's veins. He can't stop, because he absolutely loves blacksmithing, and the main character flashes a wide, happy grin. The protagonist stared at the idea of sharpening a sword, vowing to forge a blade that would outclass the one Confi already had, and his thoughts raced straight to using the magic thunderstone to blast its edge to deadly perfection. The man folded into the lotus on the ground, clasped his hands tight and fully believed, without a doubt, that he could do this. In that exact moment, Militari shot up from her seat and called his name. Then Dyert snapped, "What is it?" And she fired back, "So, are you done yet?" The main character gave a confident yes, telling him that after 30 years as a blacksmith, he starts moving quicker, though there are a few twists in the details. After a few intense moments, the sword finally took shape, and it turned out to be S-rank. Durek couldn't believe it, staring like he'd just struck gold, convinced this was way bigger treasure than he ever imagined, and even sure the rank was higher than he thought. Militaire stared at what he'd done, lowered her head, and snapped that he'd clearly gone too far. Then the guy rubbed the back of his head and let out an embarrassed little laugh. A fresh morning blasted in, the sun blazing while crowds gathered by the forge, and the girl stepped up to address them all. With a grin, the military woman announced that the protagonist's sword was finally ready. Then the protagonist spun toward her and told her to come to them. The crowd erupted into chatter. You can tell the master's right, because he struck so fast, and now everyone's desperate to know what kind of sword that was. Confi marched up to Dared in full military gear, snapped to attention, then saluted with a sharp hand to her head, naming them as she spoke, and declared that the sword was finally, truly ready. She shot back that her instincts were right, and he wasted no time. He wanted to hand it to her immediately, gripping the sword out in front of her. Clutching the blade in his grip, the protagonist declared it was his own sword, and you could tell he refused to believe it himself. The man leaned in and said, "I named it Kamina, the Thunder Emperor Kamina's sword, ranked S with holy power." Then Darrett thrust it into the girl's hands and warned, "It's razor sharp, stay sharp too," and the whole crowd erupted in shock. Confi snatched the sword into her hands, and it practically hummed with glow, bright enough to make her cheeks flare with a sudden blush. And then she beamed, grinning wide as she said the blade was absolutely stunning. Militaire swore the protagonist gave it everything he had, so Confi had to rise up for him. Don't waste those feelings. So Confi immediately snapped to attention and said she'd taken every bit of it to heart. After that, the girl grinned and promised that before the battle, she'd personally train the other girl herself. Then the crowd erupted in happy cheers, insisting that with the commander's blessing, she'd grow stronger for sure. Then Militaire swung toward Confi with a bright smile and told her that tomorrow she'd better be on the training field like a bayonet. So scary, even Dyaert flinched and knew exactly what was coming. Still, Confi nodded on the spot, and Dyaert mentally prayed for luck. Right now, in the Nana Hikari estate, the air was thick with outrage, and she snapped at the main character, demanding how he could possibly pull off something like that. Rage boiled in his veins. He whipped his hand out to the servants and demanded she look, and when they stared, his hand turned bright red because he swore he'd never forgive him. Then he snapped her name, but she didn't flinch at all. He clocked that this maid was sharp, yet weirdly creepy, and when he finally spoke up, he said he had to record the beatings and drag the guy to court. Then the girl snapped back that he wouldn't do it, and right after, Nana Hikari leaned in and demanded, "Why do you think that?" The maid wrapped up his hand with fresh bandages, swore it was fine, and then tied a neat little bow just for him. Nana Hikari was boiling with rage, teeth bared like a warning. Meanwhile, the girl didn't even look his way, just turned her head and asked if those were really the materials to make a sword. That guy smirked and bragged, calling them S-rank materials, then yanked the absolute best from his storage: full metal, earth dragon scale, thunder god stone, platinum steel, and the eternal flame stone. He said this was the only way to forge the finest sword that Blacksmith had ever laid eyes on, and the girl nodded like she got every word. Nana Hikari then clenched his fist hard, snarled that Dyaert better keep watch, and swore he'd take his revenge on him. Training day finally hit, and Militaire bluntly said it was impossible to forge Confi A into a ballmaster in just 5 days, plus they had zero clue who her opponent would be. The girl just listened, locked in, like every word mattered. The commander leaned in and said the only thing that matters is this: don't let the sword snap, and she already knows exactly how to make that happen. Confi snapped that she finally understood, just block the enemy's strikes, and Militara lit up at once, then fired back, "Get ready." She swore her body would remember every second. Then she exploded forward into the attack, and you could tell she wasn't backing down. Confi couldn't believe it. No real theory at all. They just jumped straight into practice, and the main character was just as stunned by the whole sudden frenzy. Right then, Militaire burst in and attacked the girl, icy and merciless. She snapped her sword up in front of her and slammed the strike aside. While all this chaos was going down, the girl barked instructions. "Don't take the side, just smash the attack with your blade." And then she told everyone, "Got it. I understand." After that, Militaria promised, "We're fighting again," and Convia nodded right away. Then she started sharpening her mind on one thing. She had to stop every blade-swinging attack head-on. The commander struck, and Convia answered with a clean success. She practically burst with joy. But she was so distracted that it took a beat. Then it hit her. The commander wasn't right in front of her anymore, so she blurted out to him instantly. Turns out the girl snuck up behind her, whacked her on the shoulder, and declared she'd lost, then warned her not to drop her guard in the fight. She even apologized and swore they'd run it back again. While the battles raged all around him, the main character stared at the girl and realized, right from day one, She treated her student with nothing but brutal cruelty. After a while, night had swallowed the sky when Kanfi crumpled to the ground on her back, arms flung wide, bruised and filthy. Yet she still thanked the commander with all her heart. The soldier stared at her and barked that tomorrow they'd train with Kamina. She just nodded and agreed on the spot. Then the girl with that sweet, smile-sweet face whipped around to the main character and demanded he get his sword ready for the fight. He totally didn't see it coming. He stammered, then nodded, saying yes. Night had swallowed the world outside, and that massive moon hung high, blazing in the sky, while every forge worker packed into the dining room, chowing down together. That brunette was scarfing food down like she meant business, focused, fast, and razor-tough in her whole vibe, while the guy next to her shoved food straight from a cup into his mouth. And across the table someone else was smiling and chatting it up with his coworkers. The Burnett started bragging that the commander's training was still brutally tough, and Kanfi, blushing hard, asked, "Did you really see it all?" The other Burnett nodded like, "Yep, every bit," and then they vanished straight into the shadows. They told him Kanfi was seriously amazing, doing great for her size, and the moment she heard it, her face burned with embarrassment as she blurted, "Do you really mean that?" Kanfi hated it the moment they brought up the size, so she snapped something that absolutely didn't need to be said. A brunette burst into laughter, and the blonde beside her leaned over and asked the girl if it was finally time for him to leave. Kanfi snatched her tray, told everyone she was heading out, and the guys nodded along. Then the blonde thrust a towel into Burnett's hands. His colleagues shouted Kanfi's name, and the girl spun around, right as a towel sailed straight for her forehead, making her cheeks burn with pure embarrassment. The boys beamed at her and urged her to stay warm, smiling like they had her back in every way. Then she bowed politely in return. Outside the window, the night swallowed everything in total darkness, and the protagonist stood by a column, staring at Kanfi as she trained, sword in hand, sharpening every strike with ruthless focus. It was crystal clear that the girl had made serious progress. She blasted blow after blow, furious and unstoppable, with not a hint of fatigue on her face, and the man couldn't help staring in awe. After a while, Kanfi finally halted, sucked in a breath, and wiped her face with a towel. Then the protagonist suddenly called out, praising her for a job well done. She turned to the voice right away, and embarrassment hit her hard as she blurted, "Is it really Mr. Durrett?" And with a grin, he leaned in and fired back, "So you're really training this late?" Kanfi grinned and told him she does this every single day, and she's determined to reel in the commander, even if it's only by a tiny bit. The girl flashed a huge smile, pictured Militaro right in front of her, and blurted out that her dream was to become just like her. The main character swore he understood everything, but the girl kept shoving her around, so he panicked and rushed over to see her himself. Kanfi beamed and told the man he was a kind soul, and he just scratched his head like, "Nah, it's only concern." Before asking if she was really against it, Kanfi shook her head fast no. Kanfi told her that the main character forged her into a stunning sword, so she refuses to let that blade ever snap. She pictured the blade right in front of her and burst out, calling it simply beautiful. Then its sound, like sharp flashes of thunder, jolted awake something she'd never felt before, and you could tell she wasn't just admiring it. She was completely hooked. For one sharp second, the protagonist froze. Then the girl called out his name. He admitted he'd interrupted her and backed off. Dyert, grinning like he'd just solved something, spun around and waved, and the girl sent him off with a warm good night. Seeing Kanfi's glowing, inspired face, Dara couldn't stop staring. She actually loved the sword he made that much, and it hit him. When was the last time his work ever made someone this happy? You could tell the main character was thrilled. He flashed a smile, spun around, and declared that it was all settled. He strode down the road, lost in thoughts about how he'd be stuck working with Kamina, while a bright little tune bubbled out of his humming mouth. 4 days had already crawled by since that rivalry announcement, and Nana Hikari's rage was boiling as he stomped, shouting for Gilmas. The boy demanded why his sword was rank A with 0 element, And when the servant realized it was a brutal, hard blade under that kind of weight, fear crushed him. Gilmaz looked absolutely panicked. His words came out in stutters, as he admitted it was brutally hard to even process S-rank materials. Nana Hikari snapped, furious, "I don't want to hear a thing," then shot his hand to the side and told the guy to get lost, but the other one only muttered something about the payment. The heir of the house thrust his sword out in front of him, then stared down the guy and demanded, did he really want to settle this with his life? Gilmas bolted from home, shaking with fear, and Nana Hikari snapped to her servant Eigen, "Get me one person, now." The girl nodded fast, saying she had it all under control. After a while, a man slid up to him, Detroit the mercenary, and the moment he faced Nana Hikari, he demanded what she really called him. Then straight up addressed him as Lord. He sat at the table, slugging down coffee, then spilled every detail of what happened with Duret to the man, right down to the fact that he'd failed to forge an S-ring sword, only for Detroit to shrug and tell him the rank didn't matter. Then the man bragged that any sword in the world would let him slice through anyone, and right in front of everyone, he crushed a huge chunk of metal with his bare hands. Nana Hikari leaned in and studied the folded metal with sharp focus, while Detroit just stood there, calm as a statue, smiling because the skills he'd shown were undeniable. And the boy walked away thinking there was no way he could ever lose. The heir flashed a grin and bragged to himself that this was almost too simple. Then he realized it would be even sweeter this way. Nana Hikari swung her gaze to the maid, called her out by name, and warned her to keep this from her dad and mom. She nodded along instantly. But it was obvious she wasn't thrilled about it. The competition day finally hit, and Nana Hikari spun around to greet the protagonist. He said they hadn't seen each other in 5 days, then told him straight up how proud he was that he didn't run away. Right then, every forge worker, plus Militaire and Dyert, stared forward in stunned silence. Turns out Nana Hikari had thrown Detroit into the ring as a rival to Kanfi. Once again, they're calling it a duel of blacksmiths. Everyone instantly clocked the man standing beside him, and right away they started blurting, "Hold up, is that really the Detroit Destroyer? Did he really decide to throw him straight into the fight?" People immediately screamed, "Look at the sword of Kanfi and Fi." And the girl stood her ground, gripping it tight. Then real lightning erupted from the blade. Militara exploded with rage and started yelling that this fight was unfair. And even though she clenched her fist, the protagonist silently agreed with her. Right then, Nana Hikari stared at the sword the protagonist had forged, and snapped that it was fake the moment she laid eyes on it. He kicked things off by laying down the rules. Only 2 ways to win. Either your opponent's sword snaps first, or if someone steps outside the arena, they lose instantly. While the girl started firing off complaints, saying those rules were totally unfair. At that moment, Detroit stared down Kanfi and demanded whether this tiny girl was really his opponent. She didn't blink or answer, not even a hint of fear, and right then, the judge snapped everyone's attention. He shot his hand up and told them to start the fight, and the other man instantly snapped his sword up and lunged at Kanfi. Because this mercenary didn't just fight, he knew how to end it fast. The man slammed into the ground so hard that dust and dirt erupted everywhere, and Kanfi had to scoot back a little. There was just way too much flying dirt. The spectators gasped at the chaos, then erupted into screams. What a monstrous force! Because it felt like the next blast would blow them right off their feet. Detroit didn't let the dust settle. He launched straight at the girl, spitting that she'd better get what she deserves, because she won't be able to run forever. The man struck again, and Kanfi got blasted clear. She rocketed into the sky, then landed far away from her enemy. Turns out she'd stepped straight into a trap. Right as the chaos shifted, they closed in on the corner. Detroit burst into laughter, and everyone basically announced that Kanfi had no escape left. The crowd and the forge workers stared in stunned silence, until one voice blurted out that they couldn't keep watching this. Detroit snapped to Kanfi and demanded she just hand herself over, but she clamped down hard and shot back, resolute, even a bit furious, that she wasn't going anywhere and Detroit knew he'd warned her. Then the destroyer snarled that the girl would regret her choice, right now, while he flexed and strained his arms, pushing his power to the limit. Confi stared him down, and nerves spiked in her chest, because this enemy didn't mess around. Then she remembered how the commander had hammered discipline into him, and how Mr. Dyert had built Kamina for her. At that exact moment, Detroit roared as he swung his massive sword, yelling Convi not to die. And Convi shot back, every ounce of grit in her voice, that she would not lose. The moment she said that, she ripped the brakes off her sword. Thunderous lightning erupted across the whole field and even into the nearby area, and Militaire and Nana Hikari were left staring, completely dumbfounded. Turns out, Confi's power let him snap Detroit's sword clean off. Blade went flying to the side, and his teammates froze in shock, then started arguing over whether the destroyer's sword truly fell apart. The protagonist stared at it like it might bite, his face tightening into something he couldn't explain, and he couldn't stop thinking. Did he swing that sword too far? The judge snapped his eyes to the scene, declared Confi the winner, and the whole crowd froze in stunned silence. Militaire spun to face the main character, grinning and calling him teacher. Announced that they pulled it off, and he nodded, fully agreeing. After that, Confi sprinted up to them, grinning like she just won the whole world. She shouted for the girl, calling her commander, and the girl snapped back, "Yes, I'm a good girl." Right then, Detroit, barely holding himself together and shaking with shock, staggered straight toward Nana Hikari. Durette stepped up to him grinning and reminded him, like he'd promised, that from that day on he'd better take his work seriously. The other guy snapped, "Shut up," and told him to get lost. Nana Hikari snapped his finger at him and declared he was out of the Stam army, then spat that they'd all die right here, and he'd drag them into court over it. His maid glared at him with pure fury. Then she popped him a little tap on the back to cut him off, like she was done letting him talk, and he definitely didn't see it coming. Dyert, Confi, and Militaire froze in shock, and the maid immediately bowed and apologized for their young master, then promised she'd crack the whip, scold him hard, and shake some common sense loose in him. The commander and Confi stared as the maid marched off, along with Nana Hikari and Detroit, leaving the battlefield behind. Later, inside the guy's house, the whole room felt like it was screaming that Durette was a villain, and that he'd never forgive him. Then he snapped his head toward the destroyer and demanded, "So what did you get paid for?" Detroit said he was retiring, and the whole room froze. This guy was stunned. Then he snapped, "I lost to a little girl, I'm too weak." Then he just strode out into the hallway and left them behind, saying he'd finally live in peace, plus one last goodbye before he disappeared. The air of the house erupted in rage, calling the destroyer worthless and vile, then snapped to the maid, "Now it's your turn, damn traitor." Nene Hikari erupted, screaming that the girl had the nerve to lift her hand against her master, so now she had to apologize. She shrugged and said she'd own up to hitting him. Then the guy didn't even look her way and told her, straight up, to do it. The maid slid aside mid-step, warning him about the S-Rank materials, and about the destroyer that was lurking inside the mansion. She kept going and told him she'd already spilled everything to his parents. Then she waved goodbye and walked off, and Nana Hikari nearly froze at what she said to him. He shot into the corridor after her, shouted her name, warned her she promised not to say a word, then declared he'd fire her, right when someone yelled his name. It was his parents, pure fury radiating from them like a storm, waves of aggression crashing down. The man gripped the paper in his fist, and Nana Hikari snapped, calling them right away. His father snapped whether he'd been shipping their prepared materials to another country without permission, and his mother blasted him for trying to wreck the family's reputation. They started shouting at him, demanding to know if he even understood what he was doing, while Nana Hikari tried to explain himself, but they wouldn't hear a word, and then father snapped that he'd had enough. The man slammed the truth into his son's face, and declared they were kicking him out of the family for good, and the boy was left reeling, stunned beyond words. Then the family head snapped to his servants, ordering, "Take me to the forest of Taman." Nana Hikari shot his hand out and begged them to wait, but the parents just turned their backs and strode away, ignoring him. Nana Hikari thrust his hand out toward his parents as they walked away, begging them to stop. He kept shouting their names, but they wouldn't even answer. After some time in the Taman forest, he pushed through dense thickets. Then eerie sounds erupted from everywhere, and panic hit so hard his legs started trembling. Nana Hikari stared into the void and demanded to know what they wanted from him, ranting that they were all about to vanish, while the first scratches already clawed across his face, and his mind screamed that he was trapped in a forest with monsters circling him, totally abandoned. And all of it lands on him because of the main character. He was consumed by envy, so he marched up and challenged him to a duel. Nana Hikari froze in place, dropped his head, and replayed the moment. Why didn't he just tell the truth back then? Near the army forge, Militari leaned in and told Kanfi that their duel was more than decent. She moved with the calm, battle-tested swagger of a real veteran. The girl saluted the commander, thanked her, then blurted that she won because of her, and Dorette too. Dorette just grinned and said, "I didn't do much, I only sharpened the sword." The main character claimed the girl was the real driving force, and she smiled sweetly at the praise. Right then, someone called her by name. Kanfi bolted straight to her comrades, then fired off heartfelt words to Dorette and Militaire, thanking them over and over again, until she finally reached the guys, and they erupted in cheers, praising her like a perfect good girl. Militaire stared at her and declared that today lit the fuse of her brilliant career. Then the main character nodded right back in total agreement. Then the girl burst out in front of everyone and declared that, starting today, Dyer would be their army's new blacksmith. The crowd erupted with cheers, chanting that he was just an old man right in front of him, while he just sat there thinking, "Please don't call me that." Meanwhile, in Gross's kingdom, the palace loomed huge, bristling with towers. Senji strode through a dim corridor when suddenly someone behind the walls started screaming for freedom, and right in front of his cell stood a whole crowd of people. So there it was, Sinon. Rage boiled in his veins as he blared, "You're keeping me here like a monkey. Yeah, good luck with that, none of you are getting away with this." The man snapped that they ignored his complaints, spat the words "unbad people." Then one guard finally cut in and demanded what he meant, while another guard told him to shut up and sit quietly. Senji froze for a split second, noise slammed into his head and pain flared up fast. Then, after a few moments, he stepped closer and thanked the guards, and they snapped to attention with a crisp salute. Then the guy yanked the cell bars open and barked, "Sinon, get out." Sinon froze in shock, and Senji's face twisted because he hated having to do it. A brand new day crashed in, and right by the army forge there was a massive line. So many people in shock blurted, "Are we seriously queuing again?" And a few folks even started snapping and arguing on the spot. Inside the forge, a bunch of guys leaned in, amazed that Durit and his repairs made it way easier for one of them to swing his sword. Then one guy demanded a blade tune-up, and another ordered his shoulder pads adjusted. Clutching the hammer in his hand, the main character spun toward them and demanded they wait, because in this line of chaos, everything moves exactly in order. A bunch of people crowded right into the forge, staring as Dyer took hold of the weapon and worked his magic. Right then they darted their eyes to the side, and there it was, a sword stuffed inside the box, sealed behind a glass door so you could see every detail, and the crowd instantly erupted, calling it unbelievably beautiful. One of the guys started bragging that he'd become Kamina's owner, and the other guy snapped back that it would never happen. He'd beat him to the punch. Then, right then and there, a third guy stepped in and promised he wouldn't lose to either of them. She clutched her chest and swore, "I'll become the real owner of Kamina," no doubt left in her voice. The brunette demanded to know if it really said she had to pull off an S-rank feat, and the girl nodded hard. Because, like a commander, you don't just fight, you take down one of the 4 demon kings. Right then the protagonist finally heard them, and in total shock demanded, "Tell me, did Militaire really wipe out the demon king?" Kanfi shot back, "Yeah, he really is that amazing," and she swore she'd get stronger too. Then Dyert jumped in, declaring, "Militaire is a real hero." He grinned to himself, thrilled that the sword he forged actually got to do real work, and he glanced at the hammer like, yeah, everything was spotless and perfect. Inside the forge, the visitors started grinning and chattering about what Dyert had done to Kamina. How incredible it was, while they begged to be just like that awesome old man, and Dyert heard every single word. Then he jerked up from his seat and announced he was done for the day, and the guys practically shuddered from shock. After that, he stormed outside and told them to meet him tomorrow. Right then, Militaire swooped up to him with a bright smile and told him he'd crushed it, because today was packed from start to finish. She agreed with her, then he grinned and admitted the work was way heavier than in Reeton, and now he felt truly happy. The girl laughed and blurted that she was so relieved to hear it. Militaire told everyone that Dyert's changed them too. Now the soldiers are obsessed with Kamina, so they finally buckle down and take their training seriously. The protagonist grinned and said, "This is the best praise a blacksmith could ever get." Then he straight up thanked her for it. Right then, the girl bowed her head and blurted out that she was truly sorry Her Majesty had put limits on him. So he demanded to know if she really meant the gear and repairs should be held back, and she nodded, saying yes. Then the main character shot back that nothing was wrong at all. He understood it perfectly, because a weapon like Kamina couldn't possibly be everywhere, in everyone's hands. Militaire grinned at him like he was sunshine, and a hot blush spread across her cheeks as she said she'd come with something crucial. So he snapped right away, asking what it was. The girl blurted that Her Majesty was dying to see him, so she hurried him straight to the palace. The protagonist froze in shock and blurted, "Do we really have to do this right now?" She snapped back with a firm yes, and then he demanded, Why does it have to happen now?" You could practically feel the tension choking him. Militaire made it clear. Because of his contribution, the soldiers' motivation skyrocketed, and that was a huge win. Right then, he started spiraling. Did the queen really want to see some nobody, and what was he supposed to do about it? Before he could even decide, the girl blurted his name. The man spun toward the military, stammered, and blurted, "What's a queen?" The girl paused for a beat, then said she'd explain it to him in a few words. The commander replayed every meeting in her mind and confessed that she was brutally strict. Then, right there in Gloss's castle, Queen Glossa Serenade sat on her throne and declared, "Amatruvi is broken." Senji knelt there, screaming that Sinon had tricked him, then insisted it was his fault and volunteered to take the blame, while the other guy just sat back, staring at the queen like she was pure perfection. The girl rose from her throne, strode right up to them, and snapped at Senji that he'd made a huge mistake. He bowed his head to her, shut his eyes tight, and admitted it was true. So now he was ready to take whatever punishment came. The queen yanked out her whip, snapped that he knew she hated incompetence, and then cracked it across his body. His face flushed red as he groaned in pain. The girl promised she'd smack him even harder, and the moment she said it, his own voice sounded thrilled. Simon stared in total shock and blurted, "Wait, what's happening?" After a while, the queen finally wrapped up Senji's punishment. He lay on the floor, bruised but grinning like he'd just won. Then the girl stepped up to Sinon and fired, "All right, Senji's done, now it's your turn." She cracked her whip and started railing on him as a monster, especially the guildmaster who shattered their country's treasure. The queen snapped that he'd better face his own incompetence, and the man erupted into screams about the pain he felt, trying to make her understand. But she shot back with pure fury that he was done being the guildmaster. After a tense stretch, the main character and the military finally slammed into the queen's castle, and the girl spun toward him and started calling his name. He shot back with a clear yes. They barreled up to the massive painted doors, and Nolter demanded, "Are you ready?" But the man froze and trembled at the sound of it. The main character swore he'd need at least a whole year to be ready. Then his heart would practically leap out of his chest. So the girl just smirked and called it a great joke. The guards started unlocking the door for them, and Militaire leaned in and told the man, "Don't worry, Her Majesty takes care of anyone who earns their competence." Right then they pushed in, closed the distance and dropped to their knees before the queen. She welcomed them with a bright smile, saying she was thrilled to see them, and Militara bowed in thanks, then declared that she'd brought Duret. He swore it was him, right there. Then the queen flashed a sweet smile and declared that he was the amazing blacksmith who forged Kamina and Shinma. She shot her hand up, pointed at the man, and declared with total confidence that she'd finally found the best blacksmith in all the country. He pressed a hand to his chest, shut his eyes, bowed deeply to her, and blurted out that it was an honor. Then his face erupted red. The queen told him straight to his face that Nana Hikari was his fight to handle, just him. She said she had other duties to juggle, so she couldn't step in, and then she apologized for it, like it hurt her too. She said her gaze felt clouded, and the moment it hit him, the protagonist snapped his head up and told her, "No, your eyes aren't clouded. They're stunning like precious gemstones." The queen burst into laughter and grinned that he wasn't just a master blacksmith. He also had a knack for stealing women's hearts. Dorette blushed and felt mortified by it. Her Highness swept in and told the protagonist she needed them today. This was huge. And then she delivered the grim news. Amatrugy was broken. The man snapped right back and demanded answers about the sword again, and the queen shot him with, "Did you seriously forget?" A glass rack sat right before him, clear as day. Then Her Highness declared, "This blade is an Amatsurugi." He swallowed his pride and apologized at once. He stared at that blade like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, until the queen told him a nobleman had praised it every single day. And then, one day, the sword asterisk evolved. In the end, he made up his mind and donated it to the state. The protagonist replayed one more shot at climbing to S rank, and the thought that haunted him was simple. He had to repair the sword he didn't even remember. Then his eyes snapped wide with shock, because he suddenly remembered what his student soldier friends had warned him. This queen was pure, unshakable strictness. Duret bowed and apologized, admitting he truly remembered nothing at all. The queen's eyes widened. How could he forget what he'd done with his own hands? That kind of thing shouldn't vanish so easily. The girl broke into a smile and told him he was insanely interesting. And even though he kept to himself a little, her curiosity about his every move only burned hotter. Duret was totally baffled. What kind of aristocrat keeps staring at a sword like it's a masterpiece? In his mind, rich, highborn people don't just go around admiring weapons like that. The queen leaned in and demanded repairs for Matsurugi, the sword that had just shattered, and she made it crystal clear. This wasn't just any job, it was one of her most urgent duties. The man blinked in shock. He never saw that coming, because in his head, there was no way this was supposed to be a simple request to fix the sword. Staring at the sword, he leaned in and realized something wasn't right at all. The girl snapped that there was more to it. Another middle-aged man stormed into the room, crashed hard onto the cold floor, and got shoved inside with the rough brutality you'd expect from someone dragged in for a major, unforgivable crime. It was Sinon, and when the couple spotted him, their faces snapped into shock, because they never thought he'd be here at all, especially like this. The man crumpled onto the ground, unable to move or rise, like someone had slammed him down with brutal intent just to knock him out cold. The queen snapped that he was the same idiot who shattered the sword. And then she turned to Duret with a request that sounded so deadly serious it made the room feel colder. She marched up to the blacksmith and asked if he'd take Sinon on as an apprentice. No one knows what she was thinking, but the way she said it was pure sincerity. The man sprawled on the ground, clenched his jaw, and frowned hard again, like a fresh burst of power just kicked in, because he hated every single word the queen spat out, and pure rage burned through it all. He tried to slam the defense, claiming he couldn't learn a thing from trash, until the queen snapped back, laughing that he was the only trash around and pointing him out as the one who'd caused everything. They kept going at it, yelling over each other, totally ignoring everyone else, because they were way too wrapped up in their own fight. Duret realized the whole scene had plunged into total darkness, and he knew he had to do something. Right now. She agreed to let one of her subordinates handle them, then pointed him out, Senji, A genuinely nice guy with that same irresistible charm. A bright-eyed kid burst into the room grinning from ear to ear and declared he'd shut down the whole sign-in mess before it even started. Like his voice had confidence so loud it made him feel 10 times stronger than he looked. Dyer crossed his arms over his chest and knew he couldn't dodge the queen. This was it. No escape. Saying no to her would get him killed, maybe even worse. He flashed a sharp grin and told her he'd do anything the queen demanded. Because he couldn't exactly say no, not when all he had to do was accept it, and nothing else was left for him right now. The girl shot back that she couldn't wait to see the man's success. And when she escorted her guests out of the throne room, her words sounded completely genuine. The whole crowd surged out of the royal chambers, and that massive door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous bang, cutting them clean out of the queen's sight. Derek let out a heavy sigh, snapped his hands up and stretched his back hard. Then he realized he'd been panicking for nothing, and finally he could breathe easy. He stretched his neck and blurted out, "Let's head back to the hotel." Because after that wild adventure, all he could think about was one thing, a real good rest. The girl pressed him, "Where are you staying?" And he answered, "A hotel in the Eastern District. A solid stop where anyone could finally rest their bones." Senji urged him to crash in the National Guard dorms, but Durrett blushed hard and snapped that it wasn't worth the hassle, because the thought of being there made him feel downright embarrassed. He made it crystal clear he was holed up in a top-tier hotel, so there was absolutely no reason to worry about him. He stepped up to walk them out himself. No way he'd let his guests slip away without his full attention. Eastern region. Dyer jabbed a finger at where he'd stopped. This little 2-story house packed with tons of rooms inside, and somehow it still looked warm and cozy. When he finally stepped in, he told Dell, "I'm back," and you could hear how relieved he was to have had time to rest. She broke into a happy smile and greeted him, then admitted her worry had been clawing at her for ages, because he hadn't come back in so long that her heart wouldn't stop panicking. Militaire looked absolutely fed up, then blurted that she was moving into this place too, shocking the couple so hard they couldn't even react, because they never saw the girl's temper explode like that coming. With a crooked, sinister grin, the girl announced that starting today, she'd be living here too. She refused to let Dyer slip away, and her rock-solid voice and upright posture made that crystal clear. Dell nodded, flustered, and promised she'd have the room ready in a flash, and yeah, her worry spiked at the girl's rage. It wasn't every day someone stared at her like they wanted to set her on fire. She snapped her head around and dared herself to look, because she needed answers right now, or she'd explode from the urgency. She asked, "So what do we do first, bath or dinner?" The man snapped back, "If the military's here, we eat first," then took charge of his companion like she was his own daughter. That girl and Sinan hated this. Rage hit them both, and still, each one had a totally different reason why. The man blared out, "Why are they only spoiling Dyer?" Then snapped that he'd stay here too, pure jealousy, wanting the sweet girl's attention all for himself. Senji slammed a kick into him, snarling that nobody would let him stall here. Because this rage wasn't just anger, it was a warning. He couldn't keep going like this. Dell let out a heavy sigh and told them all the rooms were gone. Only the stables were left. So no matter how much he pleaded, they'd have to leave. Sinan couldn't believe the audacity. Before he could even process it, Senji yanked him by the ear and tried to drag him straight into the stables, and you could feel Sinan's anger rising fast. He didn't like it one bit. He snapped that he was the guild master, then pushed even harder by reminding her he used to be master too, so it didn't change a thing anymore. Dell told the couple to hold up for a second, and Militaire snapped toward her teacher. She couldn't wait to get answers. The man snapped his head toward the girl, stunned, and his curiosity flared up. What did she want from him? She asked if they had anything planned for tomorrow, and when the answer came back no, the man flat out said he had absolutely nothing scheduled. The girl lit up with inspiration and said, "Then we'll finally have the whole evening to ourselves." The very next day, Durrett gripped the man's hand, and the guy practically beamed. Like meeting the blacksmith was a dream come true, and he admitted he'd heard a ton about Durrett. Rubbing the back of his head, The man admitted Nana Hikari had fired everyone, so they had no choice but to head outside. But they were just thrilled to finally get back to their commander, because they hadn't seen each other in ages. Then his voice snapped into a whole new tone, like he was seconds away from spilling a deadly secret. He leaned in and said it felt like there had to be countless Nana Hikari types out there, capable of shattering a national treasure, so why wasn't that punished? And the only reason he'd gotten away with it was pure luck. The queen chose mercy. Then Senji popped up beside him and snapped him back to reality. Time to start repairing the sword. Tourette was grateful, because for a second, he'd completely zoned out and almost forgot. They marched up to this huge bag, and you could tell it was packed with something heavy as hell, the kind that drags your arms down. Senji pointed at the bag and told them to stash the steel ore, larval stone, aqua stone, magic fortification stone, and a few tiny stones in it. He admitted he kept it from Nana Hikari, because Durit should be the one to use them, not just as a blacksmith, but as someone who truly knows his craft and genuinely loves it. He added that if that man could repair them with Amatsurugi, it would be an honor beyond anything they could ever ask for. Durit leaned in, stared at the stones like they were treasure, and declared he could use them for sure. Then he couldn't hide his excitement at finally getting his hands on such amazing objects. A nearby company leaned in and asked if they could watch the blacksmith work, and the man agreed without hesitation. He was thrilled, because getting people to see the blacksmith at work meant everyone would be happy. Staring at the sword, he froze. Pure beauty, crafted with masterful care, and not a flaw in sight. As he stared at the blade, he couldn't help boasting about how he forged it. Because this sword was made asterisk perfectly asterisk, no doubt about it. But then it hit him, hard. He started wrestling with the same question. Can he finally beat the version of himself from back then? And one thing sat heavy in his mind. Repairing that blade won't be a walk in the park like it was when he was young. The entire team huddled close by, eyes locked on the guy as he got ready to work. Everyone was buzzing, practically vibrating with excitement, counting down until he finally started. As he yanked on his gloves, he realized there was no point stressing anymore. His mind had to lock onto something else, like how in the world he was going to fix that sword. He threw himself into the work day after day, grinding and forging like a true blacksmith, enduring pain for so long, only to realize it was already too late to turn back. In the blink of an eye, the sword was ready, and the crowd watching nearby gasped in delight. Because this man somehow kept up with the work, lightning fast, every single time. 3 young blacksmiths lunged at him with questions. How he repaired the sword, what he did, anything to learn the secret. Then boldly begged him to take them as apprentices, and their non-stop dreams of becoming as great as Dyer left him blushing with pure embarrassment. Militer was right there, grinning ear to ear, and she told everyone her teacher was crazy popular, so proud of him, like he was her own dad. Darrett blushed, begging her not to hype up his skills, but then it hit him. Sinan was right beside him, furious. So he forced out an awkward smile, like he'd just been caught enjoying the spotlight. Darrett admitted he had to master his hammer handling first. His skills were still way too low, so he decided to grind a bit more in practice. Rage flared in him. He snapped that no one should give him orders, that he couldn't tolerate being commanded, calling it pure impudence, and refusing to let his pride take a hit. Senji snapped and smacked him across the head, warning him not to get cocky. An absolutely brutal scene, yet somehow nobody dared say a word. Darrett thrust a hammer into the man's hands, ordered him to smash a sheet of metal, and warned, "Don't you dare hit your fingers, or you'll end up with a serious injury." He suddenly snatched the hammer, and the crowd nearby couldn't even believe in him. They refused to entertain the idea that he could actually pull it off. Sinan lined up his hammer and aimed it at the air, ready to slam the metal down. Because he wasn't just striking metal, he was proving he had real talent and wiping the smug grins off every single person who'd crossed him. It was a total swing and a miss. He still slammed his own finger, just like someone like him would. The man crumpled onto the floor and shrieked at the top of his lungs, as his finger erupted in pain. Durrett snapped, asking if the man was all right, and Seinen shot back that nobody should come near him. Rage was blazing, and worst of all, it was Durrett's fault. He was jealous of the blacksmith and furious that he was stealing the attention. Senji slammed another hit and barked at him to stop swinging the hammer, and the crowd nearby immediately started whispering, because everyone was thrown off by Sinan's move, and they definitely didn't like what they were seeing. The man screamed that nobody should ever look down on him. Then Durrett clocked the problem. With a lunatic student like this, it was going to be brutally hard for him. That evening, everyone spilled into the bar, eager to toast the arrival of the new Mr. Durrett. A huge, shining moment for everyone there, and the whole place buzzed with happiness. They lifted their glasses and screamed they'd drink it all the way down. And right then, joy burst through the room, pushing every problem out of their minds for the rest of the night. Militaire's eyes darkened as if trouble was brewing. Something was bothering her, and that night it showed all over her face, no hiding the displeasure. She demanded to know why Dell and Confi were there, because it was obvious she expected the man to cut them loose and spend the night with her, just the two of them. Durrett snapped back that he was the one who invited them, and then admitted a blacksmith and soldiers were there too. The girl seethed because she'd pictured a romantic evening, not getting dragged into drinking with a bunch of men. Without even hesitating, she snatched the mug and gulped it down fast. Confi tried to stop his commander, but by then it was too late, and no one could pull her back. She slammed the mug down and snapped that he better not push her buttons, while the beer sloshed over the rim. But Militaire didn't care, because once she got going, she'd drink all the way to the last drop. The moment alcohol crossed her mind, she pictured her Doretta dolls, the 25 and 40 versions, plus those two tiny homemade ones tucked against her belt like they belonged there. It was already too late. Alcohol had hijacked her brain, and without a single thought she started playing with dolls, shocking the guy beside her, because even drunk as he was, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. The teen nearby just thought it was adorable that the girl got a brand new doll, and instead of judging her hobby, they backed her up as hard as they could, cheering her on like it was their own win. Comfy told them, "I'm playing like this until bedtime, so don't touch me unless you want to end up in trouble," and the warning hit hard. Somehow, the image of the Militarum commander vanished from Durrett's head, and suddenly he couldn't see her as a serious woman barking orders to her people anymore. Dell spun toward the man and told him she'd heard he was heading into a blacksmith duel, news that had her stomach in knots, so she begged him to ease her fears. She told him he'd forged a perfect weapon for Kanfa, then thanked him to his face, and Dyert just waved it off, saying it was only his job, refusing to admit he was an incredible blacksmith. She told him, "Don't play it modest. This incredible sword is what let me take down a monster with pure strength." But the guy shot it down, claiming it was all Kanfi's training. The girl stared at them with eyes stretched wide, like a kid locking gazes with her parents. Only this time, the comfort came from those big, innocent doll eyes. She suddenly closed the distance and asked him point-blank if he'd make a weapon for himself, and you could tell she was absolutely hooked, because a weapon made for Mr. Durrett. That's wild, unusual, and crazy intriguing. Durrett's cheeks burned as he blurted, "I'm no adventurer, I don't need weapons." Then he threw up his hands like, "I'm just a blacksmith, and I'm not planning to fight like the rest of this city." Militara shot back, "Why not?" And her eyes hardened. She was ready to push him into seriously considering her homemade weapon as a brilliant idea. She told him, "If you swing your own weapon, everyone will see exactly how good it is, and then people will line up to buy from you for themselves." He sat there thinking it over, feeling like it actually clicked, even if he wasn't fully sold yet. So he told himself to examine it carefully before he shot it down. Her words snapped him straight to the weapon in the back of his mind. Then he stared at his doll, still clutching that spoon like a personal blade, and it felt like he was seconds away from saying, "Yeah, let's do this." Militana stood in the street right in front of the crowd and blurted that Mr. Durrett was about to forge a weapon for himself. news that lit up everyone who came to hear her. She told him it could help him defend himself, and the man shot back that if he even got his hands on a weapon, he'd sharpen his blacksmithing skills like never before. The crowd nearby erupted in joy. Everyone was thrilled that the man was forging a weapon of his own, and they were absolutely sure it would be incredible, because not a single soul doubted the great blacksmith's talent. The man flashed a warm smile and thanked everyone for their support. Then, out of nowhere, an English shout sliced through the air. "Everyone stop!" And the whole crowd froze dead silent. Sinan snapped that everyone had forgotten him, and that claim didn't sit right at all. Then he fumed that it was pure unfairness, swearing he wanted all the spotlight Dyert was stealing. He blurted that he needed his own weapon too, and demanded to know why it was only Dyert, because he already saw himself as the kind of worthy man who could handle a weapon so legendary, one that only the blacksmith Dyert could forge. Without warning, they yanked his ear again and yanked him back hard, stopping his stupid rambling on the spot. Senji shoved him back onto the job with the hammer, way better than letting him open his mouth. They weren't embarrassed, and they weren't shocked either. Everyone saw it coming, because that kind of threat only gets worse unless someone stops it right on time. Dyert flashed an awkward smile at the whole mess, completely torn should he laugh, or should he just break down and cry. The Glow's army warehouses, packed tight and waiting like a war zone about to explode. Dyert dove into the boxes, clawing through them as he desperately hunted for the exact item he needed. He grabbed 2 stones, and the moment he laid eyes on them, it clicked. This stuff was perfect, because just by studying the rocks, he instantly knew what he needed and what he definitely didn't. Ripping through the other boxes, he stumbled on even more gear he could use for his work, and this warehouse had him grinning like a kid. Every little find felt like a win. Melita leaned in and asked if he really wasn't going to use A-rank materials. Then she hit him with a reminder. He could grab them without a second thought, because nobody was going to say a word. He shook his head and said a low rank would be more than enough. No way was he wasting time on high-rank materials. Dyert said he was done keeping the good stuff for himself. He had to hand it to the soldiers, because the real need was right there in the people around him. That line hit her like a spark. She snapped her eyes open and finally saw it. The kind-hearted, big-souled, noble man standing right in front of her. She suddenly shrank and started shaking, and the man went cold with surprise. He spun around, baffled by how fast her behavior flipped, and for a moment it genuinely scared him. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief, praised her teacher as the kindest, noblest man, and couldn't even wrap her head around how massive the soul of the person standing before her really was. Dyert shot back that he was way more than she'd credited, then said he'd grabbed everything he needed, ready to roll, and he was already chomping at the bit to start forging his weapon. A crowd swarmed around the man, buzzing with curiosity as they demanded to know what weapon he'd forge for himself, and they were ready to jump in, pitch ideas, and help however they could. He scratched his head and blurted out that he had a pile of ideas but couldn't decide what to build. Then the crowd shouted back, "Make a sword," and a super loud female voice nailed it. The girl beamed and declared, "I can help with sword training." Then she made her wish crystal clear. She wanted to train under her teacher, proving she'd be just as useful to him as he once was for her. The moment they brought up the sword, the man let out a heavy sigh, because he didn't trust himself to control it. He wasn't sure this was smart, because in his head, he kept seeing himself trying to swing a massive sword and face-planting in the most humiliating way possible. Dyert slipped on a glove, muttered that he'd rather do something else, and Militana froze. She couldn't make sense of it at all. Yet he just stayed silent and raised a hammer. After showing it to everyone, he grinned like the whole world was his stage and swore he'd bring a hammer into the fight. His own personal weapon, already picturing himself forging it with his hands. The nearby crowd snapped with shock. They never thought they'd hear that, not in a million years. They braced for some other weapon, but a weapon made of a hammer is what truly blew their minds. He told them, "As a blacksmith, I use it all the time, so I know it inside out, and it's the most convenient weapon I could possibly grab." Dyert said that since he'd been swinging a hammer all his life, he'd crush it, turning that skill into a weapon, and learning to use it wouldn't be hard at all. The crowd got it right away. This was exactly the level of magic they expected from a blacksmith, and they were ready to back every crazy idea the man threw out, thrilled to see where his weapon would go. After hours of non-stop grinding, he finally hauled out a massive hammer for everyone to see, clunky as it looked. It screamed, "Trust me," the whole time. The entire crowd froze in pure shock at just how massive and how insanely good the man's work looked, because nobody expected that kind of quality, yet the moment they saw it, they couldn't stop themselves from loving it. He stared at his work and grinned. Everything looked perfect, so he said, "All that's left is a name, and then the weapon would be ready to unleash." Nilatana stepped closer and grinned, telling him she'd got a killer idea for what to name his brand new weapon. The crowd was sure that girl was about to land the coolest name for that sword, no question in their minds, because the commander was the absolute best at naming every kind of weapon. She proudly pitched the name Dyerta's Hammer, totally sure it would light up every person standing right beside her. The room went dead silent, yes, even Dorette, because everybody stared, totally stunned at that name. At one point, the crowd erupted in cheers for the name, thrilled as can be. Yet the man beside them hated it with a burning passion, calling it downright terrible. People were yelling that the name was awesome, and that it fit the weapon perfectly, like they'd all picked the perfect title for something legendary. He hated it, but he couldn't say a word, because a bunch of eyes pinned him in place, just waiting for him to finally speak up about that name. After a few tense minutes of silence, he finally snapped back that he'd rather leave it alone. He refused to let his answer crush the crowd's bright dreams with a name that was, yeah, terrifying. The whole crowd erupted in cheers, and Darrett felt his heart lift, because as long as everyone was happy, that was all that mattered to him right now. Dyert's hammer. If you pour magical power into a single strike, that blow hits like a meteorite crashing down. A few weeks later, boom, the second training area. A lone man planted himself in the middle of a field, swinging a hammer again and again, pushing his strength higher and higher so the weapon would feel effortless when the time came. A dude standing nearby backed him up, saying he was doing amazing, and Dorette shot him a grateful nod. Then the guy wiped the sweat beads off his forehead after that brutal workout. Darrett broke it down for him, saying you've got to drop the sword at exactly the right moment in the strike, because once you swing, you're wide open and brutally vulnerable, so be smarter, be careful. Darrett nodded like he got it all. The kid kept talking, claiming a hammer could guard you like a shield, unlike a sword, and that he'd better learn real defense, and Darrett just smiled like he actually believed in him. Right at the very start of training, his own body betrayed him. He could barely lift a finger, and training felt brutal. Without even thinking, he cracked the air with another swing of his hammer, clean, confident, and brutally strong, like he was aiming straight at the enemy right in front of him. Now everything's clicking, his body finally listens. His swings feel smooth, not brutal anymore, and all that brutal training paid off, which makes him grin like he just won. He blurted out words of hype, cheering that the man was crushing it, thrilled for his new friend's big win, and swearing that his skills were only going to get stronger from here. Still, the hammer was his playground. Thanks to years as a blacksmith, he swung it with total confidence, and the weapon fit him so perfectly he barely had to think. He pushed his limits one more time, and when the day finally wore them both out, they called it a break, because the guy had been training almost non-stop all day. Durrett let out a deep, exhausted sigh and dropped beneath the giant tree's shade, grabbing a moment of rest after that brutal hammer workout. Suddenly, a girl popped up beside him, praising his work like he'd just nailed the perfect move, and she strode right next to him, proud as if she'd been watching his training for ages. Militaire snapped that he had zero free time with all these trainings. Then Durrett lit up when he finally spotted the girl, because seeing a familiar face always feels like a breath of fresh air. She added that it was all thanks to him. Every soldier was thrilled to learn, eager to hang out with him, and he stood as their go-to authority, the shining example they all chased. He shot a look at the crew nearby, guys hacking away with practice swords, someone sprinting through the yard, a group pumping out push-ups like machines, everyone locked into their own grind. He grinned at the sheer power of that image. Then the man's eyes snapped to the girl's belt, like something underneath her cloak had just called to him. Hanging there were two little man-shaped toys, and he couldn't believe she still kept them with her. One worn at 25 years, the other at 40. And the sight hit him like a punch, shocking and strangely heartfelt all at once. Militaire leaned in and asked if he could sit next to him, and he nodded immediately, because having pleasant company around always makes him happy, since hanging out with someone feels way better than being alone. Durit couldn't help but wonder, did he really put real thought into it? These days were a non-stop roller coaster, brutal danger and wild adventures crashing down on him one after another. He realized that without her letter, he wouldn't have a clue what would have happened to his life, and he could have ended up stuck in way worse misery after they cruelly yanked his job from him. It felt like he'd stumbled into a brand new world he couldn't wait to dive into and conquer. The man realized that if this chaos kept going like this, right when he was lost in his thoughts, a scream tore through the air. Trouble had just arrived. The couple whipped around and stared at the one who shattered the silence between them. The young soldier rushed around, hunting for his commander, blurting out that trouble had struck. His terrified face said it all, and this was the kind of crisis that demanded the captain step in. The girl snapped upright and demanded, "What happened?" Her tone turned sharp in an instant, and she flipped from rest to work on a dime because every second mattered. The guy launched into a story about the forest where the trees were made of stone. We laid eyes on steel bears, special monsters, and we even clocked them as A rank, the kind of nightmare that could tear through the forest. And yeah, the whole situation was deadly serious. The couple took it all in, and their faces went pale at what they just learned. They knew they had to move fast before everything spiraled into something far worse. The couple sprinted into the panic-struck city, where everyone was scrambling, grabbing whatever they could, fleeing for their lives, and fighting to protect their loved ones. Dyer demanded to know what kind of monsters these were, and the military snapped back that he never told the blacksmith a thing, because of course he wouldn't know the big events that mattered. Their brains and their violence are way beyond ordinary monsters, so for regular adventurers they're way more dangerous, and it's not smart to go near them again. The man admitted he just learned about these monsters for the first time, and the girl shot back that they're so rare that almost nothing is known about them. She warned them that these monsters don't hesitate. Once they spot people, they surge in and attack like they're consumed by hate, trying to kill without thought, driven by brutal instincts that make them terrifyingly dangerous. Diritter snapped back, stunned, and demanded, "So it's really that bad?" The girl nodded hard, saying she got it, because not everyone can face those bears, and one wrong encounter could cost a person their life. The man clenched his jaw, and the truth hit like a punch. Suddenly, he understood just how deadly serious all of this really was. Militana inched closer, voice trembling as she confessed she hated even asking. Then she still blurted it out. Could the man come with her? The fear of his answer gnawed at her, so she shut her eyes and took the risk. The man lowered his head and stayed silent for a beat. Then when he finally snapped back to his senses, he demanded to know why he even had to be there. Because there was no way he could call himself a warrior fit for a job like this. Militaire stood at the front of the whole crowd and roared that everybody already knew. When those steel bears finally roared into the forest of stone trees, everyone panicked, because one swipe from them could tear into anyone who got too close. She tells them these bears don't just fight. They wear steel armor, and then the girl shouts for everyone to aim at the spots where the armor is asterisk, the weak points that could let them beat the monsters. To wrap up her speech, she declared that if they killed the bears, they'd pull materials straight off the carcasses, materials they could forge into weapons, and Militana then swore that Derek would go with them. Every soldier lit up when they heard the news, like their hearts finally unclenched. They all trusted that this man could save them when things got brutal, even though he wasn't a warrior. He grinned and told them this was the perfect shot to prove his skills and see his hard-earned training pay off, and he'd be thrilled to work with them. Militana blared that those bears were built like tanks. Regular hits barely scratched them, and basically told everyone, use every tool you've got or you'll get crushed by monsters like that. She demanded they all remember it, and every soldier answered back at once, loud and clear, because they instantly got how serious it was. No one dared argue. Once they all piled onto the transport, that massive army surged forward, and a huge squad of soldiers marched straight into the forest to rip the monsters apart. A few hours later, Darrett realized the world around him had gone way too dark, and it stung, because fighting in the dark was brutal compared to daylight. The team barreled into the forest of stone trees and screeched to a stop, because if they don't map a plan right now, those bears will chew them up, and they can't afford to act on impulse. Militana barked for them to split up and hunt the bears, and the soldiers immediately shouted back, loud and ready. Everyone bolted in every direction at full throttle, tearing through the forest to find every secret spot and hidden corner they could cram into. She stepped forward, told them it was time to move, and after pulling herself together, she stood ready to lead her little group, ready to fight, bleed, and protect them with her life. A tiny group pushed deeper into a dark forest that clearly didn't want visitors. Its eerie air felt like it was casting bad luck on them, rattling their nerves and warning that nobody belonged here. Confi was trembling as she leaned in and whispered that real battles are way scarier than this. She expected that, sure, but training just doesn't feel like a real bear hunt at all. Dyer admitted he was a little nervous too, and the girl froze, totally shocked, because she thought an adult man like that couldn't possibly be scared. Turns out she was dead wrong. He kept talking, insisting there was nothing to fear, because right now nothing was happening, so there was no reason to panic, at least not for now. Confi clocked it instantly. These were military's people, and he knew he was right. With that girl around, they were safe, because she was far stronger than both of them and could smash the bears without breaking a sweat. The commander leaned in and said they'd even brought 2 holy weapons. No way they didn't crush the bears in that battle. Dyer slammed down with her hammer, then drew her sword like it was about to decide everything. Militaire cut through it and said he shrugs off every kind of damage, except holy, and the only weapons that carry holy power are Dyer's creations, the hammer itself and the girl's sword. She said the old blacksmith was forged from the same stuff, but when it came to power, he was totally helpless, and honestly, that track record made it no shock at all. A blacksmith like that was just dead weight. It's the cue to her teacher. Everyone who isn't a total slacker wants to be his student, because landing that title means honor, a little glory, and yeah, the man basically sees through everything. Scratching his chin, Durrett suddenly got it. If he wanted to take down those monsters, he'd need a weapon soaked in holy power, the very kind the girl had just told him about. Militana backed up what he said and snapped, "That's perfect. Him joining us boosts our odds big time. 2 holy weapons in our hands and a real team behind it. That's the kind of setup that makes victory possible." All 3 snapped their heads toward a chilling howl, and in that dead quiet forest the smallest sound hit like thunder. So the team sprang into action before the silence could swallow them. Goblins swarmed behind them in a massive wave, and all 3 of them snapped rigid with shock, because nobody expected to stumble into a whole crowd like that out of nowhere. Confi burst out screaming that they'd all be eaten, and Dyer's eyes snapped wide at what he saw. He never expected guests like this in the middle of the forest, so his whole body went rigid as panic hit, because he had no idea what to do next. Militana counted them and blurted out, 5. And she reckoned their lair had to be close, because the goblins were already lifting their weapons, ready to strike. Darrett demanded to know if they'd fight, but the girl shut him down fast, like she had something else in mind, not a brawl. Militana snapped that if panic hit, they'd bolt. So she scooped a stone off the ground and hurled it with everything she had, driving the goblins into a full sprint the moment fear hit. She slammed into 3 goblins at once, swatting their weapons clean out of their hands. Those little clubs clattered to the ground, and the stone was gonna leave nasty lumps on their foreheads. They bolted right away, but two of them stayed put, faces set, eyes locked on the team, daring them to back off, because retreat was simply not happening that easily. Darrett sank into serious thought, because staring at it all, he knew another fight wasn't the answer, so he forced himself to think of something else to avoid getting dragged into violence again. The goblins snapped their weapons up, screamed like thunder, and launched toward the attack. No way were they walking away as losers, because pure determination blazed in their eyes as they aimed to crush the intruders. Confi was terrified out of her mind, screaming at the top of her lungs, because just the thought of goblins, the smallest monsters, made her feel weak, like she didn't stand a chance against even them. Militana surged forward, ordering them to get behind her. Then Darrett charged up instead, and the shock hit her hard. Her body went rigid because she'd sworn to shield them herself, not let it be the other way around. Clutching his massive hammer with both hands, he charged into the goblins and swung with such ferocity that they blasted backward several meters from the team, flying like a few dirty specks wiped clean off a shelf. The girls froze in shock, totally unprepared for the man's brutal hit. Then their mouths fell open as they stared, wide-eyed, at what was unfolding right in front of them. The moment they hit the ground, the goblins popped back up and bolted, pure terror driving them to run so fast their fleeing shapes blurred across the path. With a grin on his face, the man started to beam with pride. He'd finally seen the results of his training, and he definitely didn't expect to land such a savage hit on his own, but he was thrilled that he did. The girls beamed at a picture of that unstoppable man saving them, stunned and bursting with joy over what they'd just witnessed. Cantha yelled that Mr. Dyert was a total legend, her hero and savior from those terrifying monsters that could have gobbled her up in seconds. Militana couldn't stop amazed. Building that kind of power in just a few weeks is unreal, and the training was clearly paying off, because the results are already showing. He forced a shaky grin and thanked them for every compliment, but embarrassment burned hot. Whoa, was that a lot? He wasn't used to praise hitting him that many times, yet he'd be lying if he said he didn't love it. He told them to keep pushing, no way they could stop now. They were basically at the finish, barely any distance left, and they just had to move. Suddenly, deep in the forest, a blood-curdling scream tore through the trees, and it sounded inhuman, pure nightmare fuel like the bear they'd been hoping for. Terrified out of her mind, Kanfa blurted, "What was that?" When an inhuman scream tore through the air, and she fought to track down the source just to steady her breathing. Dyert's body went rigid as he snapped his gaze to Militaire, like he was on standby for her command, because he couldn't move a muscle until his captain gave the direct order, no unnecessary moves. She ordered them to stay razor alert, because they had no clue what was really going on, so now they had to keep their guard up and protect each other. The forest went dead quiet, those screams cut off cold, and the silence slammed down like a weight, making everything feel even more terrifying and tense. The team leaned into the forest, hunting for any sign of danger, because they had to figure out exactly what was out there, so they'd know what they were about to fight. Nalatana clocked something terrifying and, with a shriek full of raw panic, snapped everyone down onto the ground so they could move fast. A massive tree came flying at them, fast enough to smash a person into the ground if it hit, like someone insanely strong just kicked the whole world into motion. It tore a massive scar into the ground, an ugly, deep trench like a dry riverbed, and it was terrifying because that tree could have swung down and slammed someone at any second. Everyone was shaking with fear, but Militana stood there with a steady face, because as the commander she couldn't afford to break, not for herself, not for the people following her. She marched up to the boys and asked if they were all right, and Darrett stammered that yeah, everything was fine, though that picture still terrified him. He finally managed to pull his breath back in. Kanfa broke into tears and poured out her thanks to the captain for saving her, then spun around like a guard, still on edge because this wasn't over and she could feel the danger closing in, ready to brace for a hit from any direction. Deep in the forest, something crawled back into view, inching toward the people like it owned the shadows, ready to spring at any second, striking so silently and so fast that nobody even gets a chance to react. Right out of the forest's shadows, an iron bear burst into view, standing on two legs in blinding armor, looming like a nightmare and screaming danger the whole time. Durrett stared in shock at its massive size. He had no idea the bear would be that huge, and that's what made it terrifying, because one swipe of its paw could end everything. Militana didn't waste a second. She snapped the order to Confet to move, and the girl hesitated, grabbed the whistle and blew it, calling for help like they needed help right now. Every person in the forest snapped their heads toward that sound and knew the truth. Someone was in trouble right now, and they had to sprint to it before it was too late to save a life. Militana stepped up with fire in her eyes and declared she'd fight, because she couldn't let anyone on her team march into that brutal, deadly battle when the bear was that dangerous. She snapped her gaze to her Shinma blade, slowly pulling it free. Then it flared with soft, blazing light that cut straight through the dark forest. The sword blazed with light as the girl planted her feet like stone, ready to strike, because she refused to let anyone behind her get hurt. The girl gripped her sword, and a magical beam of light blazed from it. Darrett froze in pure shock, because he'd never, ever seen anything like it. And that kind of blinding glow from a weapon is almost unheard of. She planted herself in front of the bear, sword thrust out like a warning, refusing to back down, because she'd die before letting her comrades get hurt. In the blink of an eye, she vanished, gone from everyone's sight like she'd been erased from reality, and the man stared in shock, stunned by how instantly she disappeared. Militari slammed into action with divine flash, landing a flurry of deadly blows. Everyone nearby gasped as the couple got knocked clean off their feet and were hurled into the air above the bear. She planted her feet on the ground and inspected her handiwork, but nothing paid off. Not a single scratch marred the bear or his armor, and that loss hit her hard. She couldn't process it. Her brutal, powerhouse attack totally missed, and for once it didn't just fail, it didn't even leave a single scratch. The bear snapped out of the way and went for the tree, and then the roots slowly oozed up from the ground like they were alive. Militana's jaw dropped, because she never thought that monster would pull out attack skills like that. Clutching a massive tree like it weighed nothing, the bear swung with zero hesitation. Those grinding stones screamed through the air as they rocketed straight at the girl, closing in fast enough to carve out serious wounds. That girl didn't flinch. She was ready for any strike. She wasn't the guard commander for nothing. She knew exactly what to do, and she kept her face rock steady as danger closed in. With one brutal swing, she snapped the monster's strike away with her sword, and the stones blasted backward like the attack never even happened, while she didn't even flinch. Darrett couldn't believe it. This crushing attack bounced off her like nothing, and he definitely wasn't ready for a cute-looking girl to be this strong beneath the surface. Confit burst into cheers for her captain, absolutely sure that the girl would hold her ground against the attack. She trusted her strength so hard there wasn't a single doubt in her mind. Militara snapped. It's not that easy. When a monster's rank climbs, so does its brain, and that's exactly why defeating it could turn into a nightmare. With a sudden jolt, the bear burst from his paws and barreled straight for the girl's head to smash her. So when Milo Tinana realized he'd switched tactics, she froze in shock, still not grasping how fast he'd found his footing. She refused to doubt herself. She had to trust her own power, because as a commander she couldn't afford to fail her team. The girl snapped into a fighting stance, eyes locked in. She was ready for whatever came at her. Militana lunged with her sword. Then the bear snapped its jaws shut and pinned the blade between its teeth, crushing it so tight that no matter how she yanked, it wouldn't budge. The girl reached for the sword and Confit blared, "Careful," because the sight in front of her was terrifying, and her worry for her commander wouldn't let up. The bear reared up with a monstrous clawed paw to strike, and Dyer didn't hesitate. He tightened his grip on his hammer, because doing nothing would mean the girl got hurt. He surged forward to help right away. He couldn't let the commander carry it all by himself. With one savage swing of his hammer, he shoved the bear off Militaire, sending it crashing back several meters and making it finally drop the girl's sword. Militaire thanked her for saving him, and the man snapped back that it was way too soon to let his guard down. His muscles still screamed with tension, and he was braced for anything, no matter what hit next. Kanfa blurted out, shaky but determined, that she'd sprint over to grab the other soldiers, because she had to do something, anything, just to feel even a little useful. The girl snapped the order to freeze as the bear in the back lifted its head, readying itself for another brutal strike. The monster lunged toward the girl, locking in on her alone like she was its only target, the weakest, the most defenseless one on their team. Militana shot ahead while the bear charged, snatched Kin Fu up in her arms, and leapt out of reach just as the claws came down. The girl clamped her eyes shut, terrified of what waited in the dark, because the moment she opened them, she was sure she'd drop dead. Darrett stared at it all, wounded to the core, while the girl crumpled to the ground and Kanfa blinked open her tear-slick eyes, still stunned she was alive. She blurted out a loud apology to her captain, and right then Militana pushed herself up from the ground and snapped, "It's not that bad. Honestly, I'm just relieved you're okay." The man saw Militana get tossed back and his gut dropped. Now he had to decide fast. He couldn't just throw her at that monster again, not when time was running out. Help wasn't coming anytime soon, so the man made a snap decision. Right now he had to guard the two behind him, and when he realized he'd said it wrong, he snapped back. "No, I just have to do it." Bracing himself, he clamped down on the hammer like it was his last lifeline, because time was running out and his friends needed him. The bear shot up on its hind legs and whipped around to stare at the man, while rage-fueled determination burned in him as he geared up to strike down the monster. Then boom, dark power started glowing right around the bear, and you could tell that spells disaster, and Durrett nearly froze, because he never imagined he'd witness something like that on a bear. He finally got it. Imperfections weren't hidden. They shouted at him, and he could spot every single wrong spot clear as day. Darrett burned with determination, ready to do things his own way with materials, because when he saw what was broken, he could fix it. A savage bear slammed into him, and the man yanked up his hammer like a massive, unstoppable shield just to block that brutal, clawed paw. He spotted every weak point, but the attack slammed him back so hard he had to guard himself with his hammer, and it basically killed his momentum. The monster lifted its clawed paw and slammed down with one brutal blow, aiming straight for the blacksmith, cold, ready and roaring to tear him apart. Militana's worry clawed at her chest, but Derek tightened his grip on the hammer. Magic light blazed inside it like it was alive, and he was determined to use it. He poured every drop of his magical power into it. Then the weapon erupted in a blinding flash that burned his eyes and lit up everything around him. The blast tore a massive crater into the ground, like a huge bear's body got shredded there, and the man wiped it out so effortlessly it was terrifying. Staring at all of this, Durrett just couldn't wrap his head around what had happened, eyes wide, mouth agape, because he still couldn't believe he was the one who created all of it. Militara's scream rang from up above. She shouted that her teacher needed her and asked if he was okay. Then he forced out a reply that he was fine, even though shock still pinned him to the spot. As soon as the man dropped into that hole, he couldn't wrap his head around what he'd just done. Then the girl shot back, asking if he truly forgot it, because there was no way she'd ever shake the memory of that insane stunt. She told him that during the attack, a blinding light flooded the whole area, and when Dyert pressed about whether a hole truly showed up afterward, the girl nodded and confirmed it. He stared in disbelief, couldn't even process what he'd just done. It was unreal, and the shock of his own power hit him like lightning. Kanfi suddenly launched herself into his arms, sobbing and screaming like she'd been holding it in for ages. Relief hit her hard now that he was safe. Dorette just smiled awkwardly and hurriedly apologized for worrying him. Militana snapped her cloak back over her shoulders, and even with injuries screaming in her body, she forced a calm, professional face in front of her team. She flashed a confident smile, promised she'd handle the guards, then slipped over to a small group to straighten things out and bargain their way forward. All the guys huddled around the hole, gushing that the hammer blow was totally stylish, because even the bear was gone, and it looked like a meteorite had just crashed down. Confi clung to the man while Derek gently stroked her head to steady her trembling nerves, because he knew exactly how panicked she felt about him, so he let her sob out every last emotion. Right now, all that matters is that everyone's safe. He managed to protect them. The girls are safe and sound, and that truth warms his whole soul. A couple days later, Militaire whips around to his mentor and asks, "You okay?" Because yeah, he's been through that sting too. Dyert shot back that his bones still screamed in pain, but he'd live for sure. The girl grinned and said she was almost fully healed, then proudly owned it. He swears being young feels amazing, but every now and then regret hits hard, because at his age he can't help thinking, why am I still doing this? He demanded to know whether the stone forest was being guarded right now. So the girl froze, shocked by the question, and instantly felt how weird it was. Durit panicked. He couldn't stop thinking, I'm gonna have to pay for everything I broke. The cost hit him like a truck, and he realized he absolutely couldn't afford it, so fear swallowed him whole. Militana was shocked all over again. Then she burst into laughter, waved him off like it was nothing, and teased that she was only amused by how the man reacted to the loss. She said this would become a shining reminder for generations to come of the blacksmith's power. Durit froze, totally stunned. He never in a million years thought he'd turn into a legend people use as an example for the future, and honestly, it's just mind-blowing. Militana said everyone now calls that man Darat, the Punisher, and that was a huge win, because that kind of role could hand him a bunch of serious advantages. The room snapped into tense silence. Everyone froze, not a soul knowing what to say to those words. The man switched topics on the spot, eyeing the loud commotion outside and betting everyone was itching for a fight. Honestly, it kind of amused him. Every soldier was grinding hard, and all of them were chasing the same dream, being strong like Durit, pushing themselves to train harder than ever. Militana noticed the way his feet slammed into the ground, leaving massive impressions that caught every young soldier's eye. And the man was stunned, because he never thought he'd end up becoming the example for all of them. As Confer sprinted, she spotted a couple nearby, and she definitely hadn't expected them to be there, but man, was she relieved they were. Hands to her head and heels snapping to attention, the girl thanked him for the grind, then told the captain their mission was simple: run 10,000 laps. Darit blinked in pure disbelief, staring at the mountain of laps, because no way were they truly about to run 10,000 of them. There was just no way that could happen. Militana snapped that this kind of training wipes you out, but every now and then it's worth it. So the knights can drill in control and keep going until they're totally spent. Suddenly, the girl sprinted up to her commander, spun toward him, and looked like she had to blurt out something huge, something that could change everything. The couple jolted with shock and blurted, "What happened? Did you already run all the laps?" Confi shot back, "No, it's not like that." And then, right nearby, light footsteps started to creep in. The girl blurted out that a guest from the Gross Magic Academy had just arrived. Militana was hit with shock. She hadn't even expected the guest to show up this fast. In her mind, he was supposed to arrive later. A gorgeous girl rolled up with a bright smile and told them. Dorette and her hadn't laid eyes on each other in 15 years. He was completely stunned. He had no clue who stood in front of him, and no matter how hard he stared, his mind couldn't place that face. After Nana Hikari got banished, two voices started trading secrets. One grilled the agent about how the mission was going, and the agent snapped back that the plan had already collapsed. The girl swore that a master blacksmith named Durit had taken over, becoming the one, and only Smith Gross's army depended on. The gentleman snapped that good luck was a total no-go, so the agent bowed her head, heart pounding, and apologized hard. She had spoken from the heart, because lying to your gentleman costs you way more than it ever costs him. But the Lord knew she was a top-tier pawn, Losing her right now would have been a terrible move. He promises his agent one final shot. Like, you almost never get kindness from him. The girl shut her eyes tight and thanked her master for the mercy pouring down on her. She was just relieved she was still alive, spared from the pain, and handed a second chance to finally fix what she'd done wrong. A rough voice barked that she couldn't waste a single second, and when the girl couldn't find a word back, she just nodded in silence, because her life hung on that one agreement. Dyaert shot the girl a "So who are you anyway?" And the moment the words hit, rage surged through her. She fumed that nobody remembered her, like she could have been offended if she still acted like a kid. With a smile that felt sharp, she introduced herself as Issa, like her name already screamed what kind of person she really was. Dyaert suddenly felt a vile, evil aura press in on him, and it hit like a memory snapping into place. His mind slowly clawing back long-forgotten events he swore were gone forever. He brought up that it felt like ages since they'd last played together, and Issa lit up, saying he was totally right. Then she grabbed his hands and told him she was genuinely thrilled to see him again. With a soft voice, she admitted that ever since the beginning, Mr. Doretta had been stuck in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about him, not for a second. Militaru grabbed the tween and snapped at her to back off, insisting the man was exhausted, but the girl fought to shove the intrusive kid away from her teacher. Spotting the toys strapped to her belt, Issa teased the girl for treating it like a plaything, only for her to burst into laughter, because to her, it was just a painfully pointless thing to do. She clapped a hand over her smile and burst out laughing at the fact that Militari was acting like a kid, and that laugh lit a fuse in her. So much anger that she was ready to slice her rival down right then. No thoughts for anyone around her. With a sharp, stern voice, she snapped that she'd been waiting for the moment to settle the score. And now it was here, fists clenched. She was right on the edge of going to war. There was no way they'd ever be friends. Sparks of pure conflict lit up between them, and an enemy aura surged around them. Dyaert forced an awkward smile, told everyone to cool off and turned to Issa. "So what brought you here?" Because the truth hit hard. She'd shown up out of nowhere. The girl brightened instantly, sprinted up to the man and blurted that she desperately needed his advice. Then a sudden shout ripped the moment away. A man came charging up to them, and Izu snapped that it was his deputy. Then the man beamed, saying how thrilled he was to finally meet him, only for the deputy to shoot back that he didn't think this old geezer was the best blacksmith around. He hated the idea, pressed her like, "So, you dare to contradict me?" Then swore that when he got back, he'd drag her into a private talk, and with one single line, he nearly shattered the whole image he'd worked so hard to build. Militaire was right there, and she snapped at the deputy to swallow every word back, then promised, in her own name, that Dorette's skill was the real deal. She refused to let anyone mock a man's strength because this wasn't boasting. He was truly a great blacksmith. His expression flipped instantly. He rushed up and told the commander he was thrilled to see her, then praised how amazing she looked like always, even though that sweet compliment somehow landed as total awkward nonsense to her. Dyaert clocked that old man's terrifying presence and couldn't help thinking, did he even know how he looked? Before he could finish the thought, a voice shattered the air. Someone was screaming at the top of their lungs. Sinan stormed up to them and swore he'd followed every instruction. Yet the tool still snapped in half, so rage flared in his chest, and he was itching to start yelling, scolding, and blaming the whole world for the mess. Dyaert snapped his head toward the shout and froze when he recognized the noise breaker mark on the guy's face, because that guy showed up out of nowhere, and he was backing an insane claim. Senji dipped his head, apologized for how he acted, and for smashing the tools, because the guy wanted them kept perfectly intact, and he was mortified that any of it even happened. Suddenly, the deputy flashed a weird smile and snapped his attention to Sinan. So Sinan spun around and shot back, rude as it gets, asking what they wanted from him, because he wasn't about to answer a single question. Arms spread wide in that "come here, hug" pose, the man blinked in disbelief. He couldn't fathom someone this legendary sitting out here in the wilderness, like a giant had no business in a place this ordinary. Everyone around him gasped, because they never thought they'd hear words like that about Sinan, at least not from their own eyes, where he was just some spoiled idiot who demanded everything and contributed nothing. The deputy dangled a job offer, work under him as a special instructor, and the guy said it with way too much swagger, like he'd personally known that blonde and his skills for years. He figured this was perfect for him. His whole look screams, "I was built for this," and he just knows he'd love it. He shot his hands into the air and yelled that he knew he was a true genius, trying to prove to everyone nearby that he belonged among the greats, like he'd always been like this. The man bragged that they had to march back to school to fix the papers they needed, and Issa nearly snapped, trying to stop him, because this whole thing felt like a disgusting setup for a bad joke. Fuming, the deputy snapped back that once he got back, he'd be waiting for her in his room, and he had zero plans to talk to her again. Sinan started flexing on Dayart, claiming this showed the gap in their abilities and daring him to fall in line and stay humble, because deep down, Sinan was already getting drunk on his own hype, convinced everyone must see some rare, special talent in him. Both of them vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving the whole company staring with mouths gaping in pure shock, because even they couldn't fully grasp what just happened right in front of them, so they didn't dare dig into it. Gross Army military base, where the air feels heavy and every bootstep on the metal floors screams trouble. Militara set a cup of tea on the table and pushed it toward her guest like it was their peace offering. Durrett forced an awkward smile and basically warned him that deputies like that were a nightmare. Just look at how he acted and the awful manners he kept flashing. Issa let out a heavy sigh and admitted he was dead on. Then she shot him a respectful apology, her voice trembling with real shame over the mess the deputy had caused here. The man recalled how the girl had been named Supreme Master, told her she had every right to be proud, and she immediately dropped her head, cheeks burning with embarrassment. She swore it wasn't her alone. She pulled all of this off because of the team Durrett personally built. He froze in shock, staring at the staff like it had appeared out of nowhere, because he had zero memory of ever forging anything like it. Issa blurted it out without a second thought, because she knew Durrett was the one behind it. In her hands, the mighty staff of Devando the Great Magician materialized, rank 5, blazing with the attribute of light. Staring at the staff clutched in his hands, the man went blank, like he'd never seen it before. He zoomed in on every tiny detail, but not a single memory ever surfaced. Isa told me this staff was forged ages ago and then constantly upgraded, so seeing it look different from its original shape was no shock at all. Durrett froze in disbelief. How could he call this still his creation when it had been hacked through so many changes? He'd rather die than admit it was his weapon. The man tossed those thoughts aside and asked what the girl wanted to talk about, and Issa shot back that the academy was running courses on how to study the holy attribute. That's why she pushed to create stars with a sacred attribute. So Dayart shot back that he could handle it, and the girl practically beamed as she thanked him. Militaire admitted she was itching to study the holy attribute too. She'd been thinking about it for ages, and now she wanted to dive in and learn it alongside the other students. She said she wasn't tied up with anything urgent and asked if she could take a look, and Issa snapped back, "Sure." Then pushed, "Let's hit the academy right now." Durrett barked at them to hold up. He had to grab his hammer, because something that important couldn't be left alone for a second. Issa fired off her skill, instant teleportation, and vanished to the exact spot they needed before anyone could even react. They rolled up, and the girl burst into a warm smile as she welcomed them to Gross Magic Academy. The couple stared in total awe as the world unfolded before them. Lush gardens everywhere, and right at the center, the academy's massive, elegant building rising like a dream, beauty so mesmerizing it felt unreal. ESA pushed for the first move. Greet the director, one of the academy's biggest heavyweights, because that had to happen before they even set foot to visit the students. At the table, the pretty girl smiled, greeted the team like it was destiny, and said she was thrilled to meet them. Then introduced herself as Alina Grossa, the director of the educational institution. Nilitari said she hadn't laid eyes on Alina in ages, and Alina shot back that she was thrilled to see her healthy and doing well, because you could tell they knew each other well, and they greeted one another like old friends. The man introduced himself as Darrett, told him he was happy to meet him, and just as things felt smooth, his mind snapped to something, and a storm of questions burst in. The principal told me she'd heard Durrett forged a wholly magical staff, and now she's praying that this guy can teach her students how to master that attribute. Issa blurted that the girl was Her Majesty's sister, and the man froze, then stared in shock as he realized they looked like twins in every way. Fair-haired, tall, stunning, and absolutely begging for every man's attention. Alina broke into a warm smile and told them she's kind to anyone who works hard, strict with the lazy, and most of all, she's not playing around with the results she expects from Mr. Dorrit. The girl was about to introduce him to her students, but a sudden, ear-splitting scream tore through the room. Izu. And panic flickered across everyone's faces because nobody saw it coming. A deputy was lurking nearby, furious that the girl never showed up in his room after she came back, so he snapped, "Why'd you take this mess with you?" Sinan snapped rudely, "What's a plain gray thing like you doing here?" Then he felt the crown on his head, and without a second thought, he started insulting everyone he came across. Durrett let out a heavy sigh. Today was pure misery, a brutal headache pounding his skull, and the last thing he wanted was to deal with some man who couldn't lift a finger on his own. All he wanted was to collapse and rest. Out of nowhere, someone yanked Izu's hand and dragged her closer, and that instant shock in Militaru rattled D-Rat, like they never saw it coming, leaving them spooked and instantly worried about the girl. The girl yanked at her arm, trapped in the deputy's grip, and screamed for him to let go, only for him to smirk and ask if she truly had the nerve to argue with him. Dorret's teeth ground together with pure rage. Yanking the man's hand away, the blacksmith snapped that his status forbade him from acting like that. Because with that build, he wasn't weak for a second, and he could shatter any part of the body if he had to. The deputy snapped with indignation, declaring he was one of the academy's top sages, and demanding how on earth he wasn't ashamed to grab his hand like that. Darrett said it was almost certain the guy wouldn't ever do something Izu hated. Then the deputy's courage crumbled, and he blurted that he got it, because deep down he knew everyone in this room was way stronger than him. Sinan blurted at the man to bolt before it was too late, while the deputy tore off in panic, sprinting to save his own life. The guy himself bolted, yelling for Darrett to hear him out and not pull anything reckless. Yet he still sprinted after the deputy. The three of them just stood there in stunned silence, speechless after that brutal mess, because nobody wanted to bring it up. Yet they couldn't stop thinking about it either. The military pressed the question, and Darrett snapped back, shouting that every detail had to hit the director right now, because the girl might be able to think of something and get them real help. This couple swore they'd lay everything out for the director to back up Iza, and the girl even thanked them. Then she chose not to help after all. She flashed a reassuring smile and told him, "I'm totally fine." Her gaze turned cold, and she admitted she'd grown used to it long ago. By the look on her face, this kind of chaos had been haunting her for ages. Dorette and Militaire stared at her with aching eyes, because right now they couldn't help but feel crushed for Iza. The girl snapped her hands together, like a cue to switch the conversation before things could spiral. She can't wait to introduce the couple to her students, fully convinced they'll win over every last one of them. Pointing at the day, Issa declared, "That's where we are now, inside this audience." Then he urged them on, telling them to step in and enter.